The airport rush was normal until a little girl did something no one expected. She walked through the crowded terminal behind a woman in a bright blue coat, but something was wrong, terribly wrong. She never spoke, never smiled, never ran ahead like the other children. Then, without warning, she raised her small hand and tapped her palm 3 times in a rhythmic pattern. A silent signal. No one understood except one. The only one who noticed was a man the entire underworld feared. Instantly, Rayo Yi froze. His sharp eyes locked onto the movement. His jaw tightened. A code he hadn't seen in 15 years, a signal used only by children of the Seoul underworld to scream for help when words could get them killed. Suddenly, the Mafia boss abandoned his carefully planned route, his towering presence cutting through the crowd toward the girl. Security guards tensed, confused. Notorious criminals don't chase children through international airports. But the terror in the girl's trembling fingers said everything she couldn't say out loud. Why would a child know a Mafia survival signal? Within seconds, Rayo Yi uncovered a truth so dark, the entire airport could have been hiding it in plain sight. Stay with us because this story will leave you breathless. Before we start, make sure to hit like and subscribe. And honestly, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I want to see how far stories like this reach across the world. The international terminal was alive long before sunrise. Rolling suitcases echoed across marble floors, multilingual announcements crackled through speakers, and exhausted travelers moved from one gate to the next like pieces on a chessboard. It was the kind of chaotic morning where no one noticed anything except their own stress, their own flight, their own problems. But Rayo Yi had trained himself to see what others refused to see. He stepped through the automatic doors at exactly 5:47 a.m., his polished black Oxford shoes clicking against the floor with the measured rhythm of a man who never hurried. The sharp black suit hugged his broad shoulders perfectly, tailored to intimidate without announcing wealth. But it was the tattoos that made people look twice. Intricate black ink crawled up from beneath his crisp white collar, spreading across his neck like dark vines, each symbol a story written in the language of violence and survival. Airport security noticed him immediately. They always did, but no one approached. Men like Rayo Yi existed in a gray zone where laws bent but never quite broke in public view. He moved through the crowd with the fluid confidence of a shark cutting through shallow water. Families rushed past in clusters, dragging oversized luggage and crying children. Business travelers clutched their phones like weapons, barking orders into Bluetooth earpieces. A young couple argued near the check-in counter, their voices sharp with exhaustion. Normal chaos, expected disorder, yet something felt off. Rayo Yi paused near a row of departure screens, pretending to check flight information while his eyes performed their real work. Scanning, calculating, reading the invisible currents that most people never noticed. He wasn't here for a vacation. He wasn't here to catch a flight. He was here because the Nakamura family had requested a face-to-face meeting, and when Japanese syndicate leaders asked for your presence, you showed up. The deal on the table could shift territorial control across 3 countries. Millions of dollars in shipping routes, access to ports that governments pretended didn't exist. But Rayo Yi never walked into any negotiation blind. His right-hand man, Diho, was already positioned near Gate 47, blending into the crowd with a tablet and a worn backpack, looking every bit the exhausted graduate student. 3 more of his men were scattered throughout the terminal, invisible threads in a web that could tighten the moment he gave the signal. This was standard protocol. Never be the prey. Always control the environment. But this morning, the environment was pushing back. Rayo Yi's instincts had kept him alive through 15 years of underworld warfare. Those same instincts were now screaming that something in this terminal was wrong. Not wrong like a police sting. Not wrong like a rival gang setting up an ambush. Wrong in a way he couldn't name yet. A wrongness that moved like smoke through the crowd, invisible but suffocating. He shifted his position slightly, his back now against a concrete pillar that gave him a clear view of the central walkway. A mother struggled with a stroller near the coffee stand, her face red with frustration. A businessman shouted into his phone in Mandarin, his free hand gesturing wildly. A group of college students laughed too loudly, passing around a phone showing some viral video. All normal, all expected. So why did his spine feel like ice? the automatic doors opened again. Another wave of passengers flowed inside. Rayo Yi's gaze swept left to right, a practiced motion he'd performed 10,000 times in 10,000 different locations. Then he saw her. Or rather, he saw them. A woman in a bright blue coat, professionally tailored, expensive but not flashy. She walked with the brisk confidence of someone who traveled often, someone who knew exactly where she was going. Behind her, 3 children moved in a tight formation. A girl in a pink jacket and mint dress. 2 boys in mismatched winter clothes that seemed too heavy for the season. That was the first detail that snagged in Rayo Yi's mind. The clothes were wrong. Not stylistically wrong, functionally wrong. The pink jacket had mud stains near the hem. The older boy's shoes didn't match, one Nike, one off-brand canvas. The younger boy's coat hung off his shoulders like he'd grabbed it from a lost and found. But it was their faces that stopped Rayo Yi cold. They weren't excited. Children at airports were always excited even when they were exhausted. They pointed at planes through the windows. They whined about snacks. They asked 1,000 questions. These 3 moved like prisoners in a line, silent, hollow-eyed, obedient in a way that felt wrong. The woman in the blue coat didn't look back at them, not once. She didn't adjust the little girl's jacket, didn't tell the boys to hurry up, didn't perform any of the small, automatic gestures that real mothers made without thinking. She simply walked, her eyes scanning the terminal with the mechanical precision of someone checking boxes on a list. Gate number, security checkpoint, restroom location. Rayo Yi felt something shift in his chest, a familiar weight, a familiar ghost. For just a moment, the little girl in the pink jacket looked exactly like his sister had looked the day she disappeared. Same dark hair falling across frightened eyes. Same small shoulders hunched inward like she was trying to make herself invisible. Same trembling hands. He forced the memory down. Ghosts had no place in business, but his feet didn't move toward Gate 47, didn't move toward the meeting that could reshape his empire. Instead, he stayed exactly where he was, watching the woman in blue guide her silent parade of children toward the security line. Something was wrong. Every instinct he'd honed on the streets of Seoul was firing warning signals. But this wasn't his territory. This wasn't his fight. He had a meeting in 18 minutes that would determine whether his shipping routes stayed open or got swallowed by the Nakamura network. He couldn't afford distractions. The woman in blue reached into her purse and pulled out boarding passes. 4 tickets. A family package. Destination unclear from this distance. The children stood perfectly still beside her. No fidgeting, no complaints. The older boy's hand rested on the younger boy's shoulder, protective but mechanical, like he'd been trained to stand that way. The little girl stared straight ahead, her lips pressed into a thin line. Rayo Yi's phone buzzed in his pocket, a message from Diho. Position confirmed. Nakamura rep is early, we're on. He should move. He should walk away. He should let whatever was happening with that blue-coated woman and her hollow-eyed children remain someone else's problem. Airport security existed for a reason. Social services existed for a reason. The law existed to handle things like this. But Rayo Yi had spent 15 years learning that the law was slow, blind, and bought. The law hadn't saved his sister. The law didn't save children who traveled in silence. He typed back a single word. Wait. Diho's response was immediate. Problem. Rayo Yi didn't answer. He was already moving, his long strides cutting through the crowd, his eyes locked on the blue coat 20 meters ahead. He didn't know what he was looking for. He didn't know what he'd do when he found it. But his body had made a decision his mind hadn't caught up to yet. The woman reached the security line. She handed the boarding passes to a tired-looking TSA agent who barely glanced at them before waving the group through to the document check. The children moved forward in their mechanical formation. No one ran. No one looked back. The little girl's hand rose slightly, hovering near her chest, fingers trembling. That's when it happened, the moment that would change everything. The little girl's fingers moved in a pattern. Tap, 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 tap. A rhythm, a code. A signal used by children in the Seoul underworld when they needed help but couldn't scream. Rayo Yi had learned it from his sister when they were kids, a game she'd invented to communicate across crowded markets without speaking. He hadn't seen it in 15 years, hadn't thought about it in a decade, but his body recognized it instantly. The girl's eyes flicked sideways. For just a fraction of a second, she looked directly at Rayo Yi, her gaze locked onto his tattooed neck, not with fear, with recognition. Like she knew exactly what those marks meant. Like she understood that the man with the dark ink and the sharp suit was someone who lived outside the rules, someone powerful enough to ignore the systems that were failing her. Then she tapped again. Tap, 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 tap. High alert, immediate danger, no time. Rayo Yi's entire world narrowed to a single point. The business deal evaporated. The Nakamura meeting ceased to exist. 15 years of carefully built control shattered in the space of 3 seconds. Because standing 20 meters away, about to disappear through airport security into a system designed to move people quickly and quietly across borders, was a little girl who knew a code that only children of his world should know. His phone buzzed again. "Diho, boss, Nakamura's asking for you." Rayo Yi's jaw tightened. His hands curled into fists at his sides. Every logical part of his brain screamed that this was suicide. Interfering with a family in a public airport, approaching children who weren't his, risking exposure, risking arrest, risking everything he'd built. But logic had never saved anyone. He watched the woman in blue move through the document check, the children trailing behind her like ghosts. In 60 seconds, they'd be through security. In 10 minutes, they'd board a plane. In 6 hours, they'd land somewhere that would make them disappear forever. Rayo Yi took one step forward, then another. The crowd parted around him without realizing why. Predators had that effect. He moved with the silent inevitability of a closing trap, his eyes never leaving the blue coat ahead. Behind him, somewhere in the terminal, Diho was probably losing his mind. The Nakamura family was probably already angry. His empire was probably already cracking. But empires could be rebuilt. Little girls couldn't. The woman in blue hadn't noticed him yet. The children had. The older boy's eyes widened. The younger boy gripped his brother's hand tighter, and the little girl in the pink jacket raised her trembling hand one more time. Tap, 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 tap. Rayo Yi was 10 meters away now, close enough to see the fear carved into those small faces, close enough to see the mud stains weren't mud at all, close enough to know that whatever he did in the next 60 seconds would either save lives or destroy his own. The woman in blue finally sensed the shift in the air. She turned, her professional smile already forming. Then she saw him, saw the tattoos, saw the cold fury in his eyes, saw a man who didn't belong in her carefully planned morning. Her smile froze. Her hand moved instinctively toward her purse. But Rayo Yi was already speaking, his voice low and sharp as broken glass. "Those children, where are you taking them?" The woman in the blue coat smiled. It was a practiced smile, the kind that came from years of customer service training or airline frequent flyer status. Professional, dismissive, designed to end conversations before they started. "Excuse me," her voice carried just enough confusion to sound innocent. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" Rayo Yi didn't move. His eyes stayed locked on the children, cataloging every detail his instincts were screaming about. The way the older boy's hand tightened protectively on his brother's shoulder. The way the little girl's breath came too fast, too shallow. The way none of them looked at the woman when she spoke, as if eye contact was forbidden. "I asked you a question." Rayo Yi's voice dropped lower, each word precise and cold. "Where are you taking them?" The woman's smile thinned. Her hand shifted slightly, adjusting the purse strap on her shoulder in a movement that looked casual but positioned her body between Rayo Yi and the children. "I'm taking my kids to visit their grandmother. Not that it's any of your business." Around them, the flow of travelers continued. A family pushed past with oversized luggage. A businessman bumped Rayo Yi's shoulder without apologizing. Security announcements echoed overhead in 3 languages. The world kept moving, oblivious. But in this small pocket of space near the document check, time had frozen. Rayo Yi took one step closer. Just one. But the shift in proximity changed everything. Suddenly the woman could see the full detail of the tattoos crawling up his neck, could see the cold calculation in his eyes, could recognize, perhaps for the first time, that the man standing in front of her wasn't asking questions out of concern. He was asking because he already knew the answers and was deciding what to do about them. Her professional mask cracked, just slightly, just enough. "Look, I don't know who you are, but we're going to miss our flight." She turned back toward the security line, her hand reaching for the oldest boy's arm. That's when the little girl moved. It wasn't dramatic, wasn't loud. She simply raised her small hand again, fingers trembling, and pressed her palm in that same rhythmic pattern. Tap, 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 tap. But this time she held Rayo Yi's gaze while she did it. This time there was no mistaking the message. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a nervous habit. This was deliberate communication from a child who had been taught that survival sometimes required silence and signals instead of screams. Rayo Yi's world tilted, because in that moment, he wasn't standing in an airport terminal anymore. He was standing in a crowded Seoul market 15 years ago, watching his 7-year-old sister tap that exact same pattern against her chest while strange men circled closer. He'd been 12 then, old enough to know something was wrong, too young to know what to do. His sister had invented the code when they were little, a game to communicate when their uncle's house got too loud, when the adults were fighting and they needed to stay hidden. Tap tap meant, "Come get me." 3 taps meant danger. The full sequence meant, "Help me now." He taught that code to his younger sister, only his sister. It was their secret, their language, their last line of defense in a world that had never been kind. And when she disappeared, he'd assumed the code died with her. But here it was, transmitted through the trembling fingers of a little girl in a pink jacket who had no business knowing it. Unless she'd learned it the same way his sister would have taught it, in the darkness, in the silence. In the places where children passed survival strategies like contraband. How does a child know a Mafia signal? The question burned through Rayo Yi's mind with the force of a bullet. That code wasn't written down anywhere. It wasn't taught in schools or shared on playgrounds. It existed only in the shadows of the Seoul underworld, passed from older kids to younger ones in orphanages and safe houses and holding cells. Children who'd survived trafficking. Children who'd learned to communicate without words because words could get you killed. Which meant this little girl had either been part of that world or had been taught by someone who was. And if she was using it now, here, in an international airport with a woman who called herself Mother, but moved like a handler, then everything Rayo Yi suspected was true. His phone buzzed again. He ignored it. Diho could wait. The Nakamura family could wait. The entire underworld could wait. Because standing in front of him was a ghost made flesh, a second chance wrapped in a pink jacket and mint dress. "What's your name?" Rayo Yi asked, his voice gentler now, directed past the woman to the little girl. The woman in blue stepped sideways, physically blocking his view. "That's enough. I don't know what your problem is, but if you don't leave us alone, I'm calling security." "Call them." Rayo Yi didn't blink. "I'll wait." The woman's hand moved toward her phone, but something in Rayo Yi's expression stopped her. Maybe it was the absolute certainty in his eyes. Maybe it was the way his body had shifted into a stance that said he wasn't leaving no matter who she called. Or maybe it was the tattoos themselves, the marks that announced to anyone who understood these things that this man didn't answer to airport security or local police or anyone else who operated inside normal systems. Behind her, the little girl's hand moved again. Not the signal this time. Just a small, desperate gesture toward Rayo Yi, fingers outstretched like she was reaching for something she couldn't quite touch. The older boy saw it and immediately grabbed her hand, pulling it down, his face tight with fear. Not fear of Rayo Yi, fear of the woman in blue noticing. But Rayo Yi had already seen it, had already understood the silent plea beneath the signal. This child wasn't just asking for help. She was choosing him specifically, choosing a stranger with neck tattoos and dead eyes over the woman who held her boarding pass. That kind of choice didn't come from confusion or childish whims. It came from desperation. "Roseline," the youngest boy whispered the name so quietly it was barely sound. "Stop." The woman in blue spun toward him, her smile completely gone now. "Be quiet." But the damage was done. Roseline, a name, an identity, A single word that transformed the little girl from an anonymous face in the crowd to a real person with a real story. Rayo Yi filed the name away in the part of his mind where he kept things that mattered. Roseline, he repeated, letting the name settle between them. My name is Rayo Yi. Do you know what these marks mean? He gestured to his neck tattoos, the intricate patterns that told a story only certain people could read. Rosaline's eyes widened. She nodded once, quick, terrified, but certain. The woman in blue's face shifted from annoyed to genuinely concerned. We're leaving, now. She grabbed Rosaline's shoulder, her grip tight enough to make the girl wince. Rayo Yi's hand shot out, not touching the woman, not threatening, just raised in a gesture that said stop. You take one more step with these children, and I will make sure you never reach that gate. The woman laughed, actually laughed, high and sharp and laced with just enough hysteria to reveal the cracks beneath her professional veneer. You're threatening me in an airport? Are you insane? Probably. Rayo Yi's voice was flat, empty, the tone of a man who'd made worse decisions for better reasons. But I know what I'm looking at, and so do you. For just a moment, the mask dropped completely. The woman in blue stared at Rayo Yi with the cornered desperation of someone who just realized their carefully planned morning had been derailed by a variable they couldn't control. She glanced toward the security checkpoint, clearly calculating whether she could make it through before he stopped her. But Rayo Yi was already moving, his body angled to cut off any escape route. Who taught you? Rayo Yi's attention shifted back to Roseline, ignoring the woman entirely now. Who taught you that signal? Roseline's lips trembled. She glanced at the woman, then at the boys, then back to Rayo Yi. The weight of what she wanted to say pressed against her silence like a scream trapped behind glass. But before she could answer, the woman in blue made her move. She stepped backward, pulling all 3 children with her, creating distance and chaos simultaneously. Security, she shouted it loud enough to turn heads. This man is harassing my children. Rayo Yi didn't flinch. He'd expected this. Predators always played the victim when cornered. But the shout had the desired effect. Travelers stopped, stared. A TSA agent looked up from the document check. An airport security officer started moving toward them from across the terminal. The situation was escalating exactly the way the woman wanted it to. But Rayo Yi had spent 15 years navigating situations where the official channels were the enemy. He didn't run, didn't retreat. Instead, he did something the woman clearly didn't expect. He raised both hands in a gesture of surrender and stepped back, giving her space, giving the approaching security officer a clear view of a calm, controlled man who didn't look like a threat. My apologies, Rayo Yi said, his voice carrying just enough volume to reach the officer but not enough to cause a scene. I thought I recognized someone. My mistake. The security officer slowed, assessing. Rayo Yi's expensive suit and calm demeanor didn't match the profile of someone causing real trouble. The woman in blue, breathing hard and clutching the children like shields, looked more panicked than he did. The officer's hand rested on his radio, uncertain. Everything okay here, ma'am? The officer directed the question at the woman. Yes, fine, he scared the kids. She was already backing toward the security line again, desperate to end the interaction and disappear through the checkpoint. The officer looked at Rayo Yi. Sir, I'm going to need you to step back and give this family some space. Rayo Yi nodded slowly. Compliant, cooperative, everything the officer wanted to see, but his eyes never left Roseline. And in the 3 seconds before the woman pulled her toward the security line, he saw the little girl mouth something. No sound, just lips moving in a desperate, silent plea. Help me. Then they were moving. The woman in blue practically dragged the children through the document check, her boarding passes already in hand, her professional smile forcibly reconstructed. The TSA agent waved them through without a second glance. Standard family, standard morning, standard everything. Except Rayo Yi could see the older boy looking back over his shoulder, could see the younger boy stumbling because the woman was moving too fast. Could see Roseline's small hand, still trembling as she clutched her pink jacket. The security officer was still watching Rayo Yi, waiting to see if he'd cause more problems. In 30 seconds, the woman and children would be through the metal detectors and into the secure zone. In 2 minutes, they'd be at their gate. In 10 minutes, they'd board a plane that would take them somewhere Rayo Yi couldn't follow without causing an international incident. Why did Rayo Yi stop? The question echoed through the terminal like a ghost. He could walk away right now, could go to his meeting, could pretend he hadn't seen anything, could tell himself that one little girl's signal wasn't his responsibility. But the moment Roseline had tapped that code, she'd reached across 15 years of guilt and grief and grabbed hold of something Rayo Yi thought he'd buried. His sister's voice, his sister's fear. His sister's final, desperate signal that he'd been too young and stupid to understand. He pulled out his phone and typed a message to Diho. 3 words. Cancel the meeting. The response came back immediately. Are you serious? Rayo Yi watched Roseline disappear through the metal detector, her small frame swallowed by the crowd on the other side. The woman in blue was already rushing them toward the gates, checking her watch, moving with the efficient panic of someone who knew they'd just narrowly escaped something dangerous. What is the girl trying to tell him? Rayo Yi already knew the answer. She was telling him the same thing his sister had tried to tell him 15 years ago, that the world was full of people who looked normal and acted normal and smiled at the right times, but underneath, the performance was a machine designed to chew up children and spit out ghosts. She was telling him that she knew what his tattoos meant because she'd learned to recognize predators and allies in the darkness where normal rules didn't apply. She was telling him that the woman in the blue coat wasn't a mother, wasn't family, wasn't anything except a handler moving cargo from one location to another. And she was telling him that he was her last chance. Rayo Yi typed one more message to Diho. I need eyes on gate 47. Woman in blue coat, 3 kids. Don't let them board anything until I get there. He started walking toward the security line, his mind already calculating. He couldn't just follow them through. TSA would flag him. Too many tattoos, too much cash in his wallet, too much wrong about a man like him trying to chase a family through an airport. He needed credentials he didn't have, access he couldn't get, time he didn't own. But what he did have was Diho, 3 other men positioned throughout the terminal, and 15 years of experience making impossible things happen through force and fear and the kind of connections that didn't exist on any official record. The security officer was still watching him. Rayo Yi met his gaze and nodded once, a silent acknowledgement that he was leaving. Then he turned and walked toward the nearest restroom, pulling out his phone as he moved. Diho answered on the first ring. Boss, what the hell is going on? I need a favor, Rayo Yi said quietly, his voice steady despite the rage building in his chest. And I need it in the next 5 minutes. What kind of favor? Rayo Yi watched the security checkpoint in the reflection of a window. Watched the crowd flow through in endless waves. Watched the system designed to move people efficiently from one place to another without asking questions or noticing patterns or caring about the small hands that trembled when they shouldn't. The kind that's going to cost us everything if I'm wrong, Rayo Yi said, and cost 3 children their lives if I'm right. Diho didn't ask questions. That was one of the reasons Rayo Yi had kept him close for 7 years. In the underworld, loyalty meant following orders even when they seemed insane, especially when they seemed insane. 2 minutes after the phone call, Diho was standing outside the restroom entrance with a tablet, a Bluetooth earpiece, and the kind of focused intensity that came from years of handling crisis situations. Tell me what you need, Diho said quietly, his eyes already scanning the terminal for threats. Rayo Yi handed him his phone, showing the brief video he'd managed to capture before the woman in blue had disappeared through security. It was shaky, distant, barely 10 seconds long, but it showed the 3 children clearly. Pink jacket, mismatched shoes, hollow eyes. That woman, those kids, they went through security 6 minutes ago. I need to know what gate they're headed to, what flight, what destination. Rayo Yi's voice was calm, but his hands weren't. They'd curled into fists at his sides, knuckles white with tension. And I need you to find out without triggering any official channels. Diho studied the image, his expression unreadable. "You want me to hack airport systems. I want you to use our contacts. Someone in this terminal owes us favors. Call them in." Deho's jaw tightened. He knew what this meant. Calling in favors for something that wasn't business, wasn't territory, wasn't profit, meant burning resources they might need later. It meant exposing their network for something personal. But he also knew that tone in Rayo Yi's voice. The flat, dead certainty that said arguing would be useless. "Give me 3 minutes." Deho stepped away, already typing on his tablet. Rayo Yi moved back toward the security checkpoint, staying just outside the officer's line of sight. From this angle, he could see through the glass barriers into the secure area beyond. Somewhere in that maze of gates and duty-free shops and coffee stands, a woman in a blue coat was moving 3 children toward a plane. But which gate? Which airline? Which destination would make 3 kids vanish most efficiently? His mind raced through the logistics. International flights meant more scrutiny, more documentation, more chances for someone to notice discrepancies. But they also meant crossing jurisdictions, entering countries where missing children reports might never be filed or followed up. Domestic flights were faster, easier, but left more of a trail, unless the destination itself was the point. Unless wherever they were going had systems in place to receive children who arrived with the wrong paperwork and the wrong stories. Why are their clothes wrong for the weather? The question had been nagging at Rayo Yi since the moment he'd first seen them. It was early February, cold enough that most travelers wore heavy coats and scarves. But the 2 boys had been dressed in mismatched winter layers that looked wrong together. One had a thick parka that was too big, sleeves hanging past his hands. The other wore a thin fleece jacket that barely covered his wrists. Roseline's pink jacket was spring weight, meant for mild weather, not airport terminals with aggressive air conditioning. Children's clothes told stories. Parents coordinated, made sure sizes matched, made sure seasons aligned. But these 3 looked like they'd been dressed from a donation bin or a storage room. Grabbed whatever fit approximately, whatever wouldn't draw attention from a distance. The kind of clothes meant to blend in long enough to get through a checkpoint, then be discarded and replaced on the other side. And the shoes. God, the shoes. Rayo Yi had spent 15 years noticing details that most people missed. In his world, shoes told you if someone was running, fighting, or planning to stay. The older boys' mismatched sneakers, one Nike, one off-brand, weren't just poor fashion. They were wrong sizes. The Nike was too tight. Rayo Yi had seen the way the boy walked, favoring his left foot. The other shoe was too loose, requiring the shuffle step of someone trying to keep it from falling off. No parent bought their child mismatched shoes in wrong sizes. But someone moving multiple children quickly might grab whatever was available and close enough, might prioritize speed over comfort, might not care if a 7-year-old's feet hurt because the journey would be over soon anyway. Deho returned, his face grim. "Gate 23, Singapore Airlines Flight 319 to Manila, boards in 40 minutes. Manila, Rayo Yi's stomach dropped. The Philippines had ports, had systems, had networks that specialized in moving people across borders without documentation. He'd dealt with some of those networks himself, though never for this, never for children. "Passenger manifest?" Rayo Yi asked. Deho pulled up a screen on his tablet. 4 passengers under 1 reservation, Catherine Hayes and 3 minors, Roseline Hayes, age 7, Marcus Hayes, age 9, Timothy Hayes, age 6. Hayes, Rayo Yi tested the name. It sounded American, generic, forgettable. Background. "Working on it, but boss." Deho hesitated, which he rarely did. "Even if something's wrong here, we can't just grab kids in an airport. We don't have authority. We don't have jurisdiction. If you're wrong about this." "I'm not wrong." Rayo Yi cut him off. "That girl signaled me. She used a code that only exists in our world. That means she either came from our world or learned from someone who did. Either way, the woman with her isn't her mother." "You're sure?" Rayo Yi thought about the way Catherine Hayes, if that was even her real name, had moved through the terminal. The constant scanning, the rigid posture, the way she'd positioned herself between the children and every potential threat. Those weren't the movements of a mother. They were the movements of a guard, a handler. Someone transporting valuable cargo that might try to run. "Where is their luggage?" Rayo Yi asked suddenly. Diho blinked. "What?" "A family of 4 flying to Manila. Where are their suitcases? Their carry-ons?" Rayo Yi pulled up the video again, studying every frame. The woman had a purse. A single, professional leather purse. No backpack, no rolling suitcase. No child-sized bags with toys or tablets or snacks. The children themselves carried nothing. Not a stuffed animal, not a book, nothing. Families traveling with 3 kids looked like moving disasters. Bags everywhere, toys spilling out, snacks in every pocket, tablets and headphones and chargers, and the accumulated chaos of keeping children entertained for hours. But this group had moved through the terminal like ghosts. Light, fast, temporary. "They checked everything," Diho suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. "Check the baggage claim for their flight. See how many bags are registered to Catherine Hayes." Diho typed rapidly, his contacts feeding him information that would take normal civilians hours to access through official channels. His face darkened. 2 bags, total weight 48 pounds. For 4 people traveling internationally. Rayo Yi let the implications hang in the air. That's not a family going on vacation. That's not even a family visiting relatives. That's someone making a quick transfer. Could be they're only staying a few days. "Then why are the boys so silent?" Rayo Yi interrupted. "Pull up airport security footage, terminal cameras, find them from when they first entered." Diho's fingers moved across the tablet. He had contacts in airport security, underpaid guards who supplemented their income by looking the other way when Rayo Yi's shipments moved through cargo. Those same contacts could access camera feeds if motivated properly. Within 90 seconds, Diho had footage from 40 minutes earlier. The screen showed the main entrance, morning rush, crowds flowing in. Then Catherine Hayes appeared, the blue coat distinctive even in the pixelated feed. Behind her, 3 children. But this time, Rayo Yi could see the full sequence, could see how they'd arrived. No car pulled up to drop them off. They walked in from the parking structure. Catherine in front, children following in that same tight formation. No excitement, no pointing at planes through the windows, no asking questions, just silent. Mechanical obedience. "Go back," Rayo Yi ordered. "Show me the parking structure feed." Diho hesitated. "Boss, I don't know if I can." "Try." More typing, more waiting. Then a grainier feed appeared, showing the parking structure's 3rd level. A white van pulled into a space. Waited. 3 minutes passed. Then the side door opened and Catherine Hayes stepped out. She looked around, checked her phone, adjusted her coat. Then she reached back inside and pulled out the first child, the older boy, Marcus, according to the manifest. The boy stumbled as he climbed out, like his legs had fallen asleep, like he'd been sitting in one position too long. Catherine steadied him with a hand on his shoulder, the grip firm and controlling. Then she pulled out the second boy, Timothy, then Roseline. All 3 children blinked in the parking structure's fluorescent lights like they'd been in darkness. Roseline's hand went up to shield her eyes. Timothy swayed on his feet. Marcus grabbed his brother's arm to keep him upright. "They were in that van for a while," Diho said quietly. "Look at how they're moving, stiff, disoriented." Rayo Yi watched Catherine check her phone again, then guide the children toward the terminal entrance. No luggage visible except her purse. No car seats in the van despite 2 of the children being young enough to require them by law. No signs of a normal family trip. Just a woman efficiently transferring 3 packages from point A to point B. "Run the van's plates," Rayo Yi said. "Already on it." Diho waited, then frowned at his screen. "Registered to a rental company, picked up yesterday morning in Los Angeles. Scheduled return tomorrow." Los Angeles to this airport was a 4-hour drive minimum, which meant Catherine had picked up 3 children somewhere in LA, driven them here, and was now putting them on a plane to Manila. All within 36 hours. That wasn't a custody transfer. That wasn't a family trip. That was a time-sensitive operation moving assets quickly before someone noticed they were missing. Rayo Yi's phone buzzed. one of his other men positioned near the gates. The message was simple. Blue coat spotted. Gate 23, kids look scared, woman on phone, constant checking exits. She knows something's wrong, Rayo Yi said. She felt me watching her. Now she's paranoid. Good, Diho replied. Paranoid people make mistakes. But Rayo Yi wasn't sure that was good. Paranoid people also accelerated their timelines. If Catherine thought she'd been compromised, she might try to board early, might call her contacts, might change plans entirely. He needed more information before she disappeared into that plane. The boys, Rayo Yi said, pulling up the security footage again. Look at their eyes. Diho zoomed in on the feed. Even through the pixelation, the difference was visible. The older boy, Marcus, had dark circles under his eyes. The younger boy, Timothy, blinked slowly, mechanically, like he was fighting sleep. Both moved with the sluggish coordination of children who'd been given something to keep them calm. Not enough to knock them out, just enough to make them compliant, manageable, quiet. Why are the boys so silent? Because silence had been enforced, either through fear or through chemistry. Either they'd learned that speaking brought consequences, or they'd been medicated into docility. Rayo Yi had seen both methods used in trafficking operations, had shut down 3 rings himself over the years, though never for altruistic reasons. Those operations had been encroaching on his territory. This was different. This was personal. What do you want to do? Diho asked quietly. Rayo Yi watched the footage loop. Watched 3 children stumble out of a van and follow a stranger through an airport without question. Watched them move like sleepwalkers through a system designed to move people efficiently without asking why those people looked wrong, acted wrong, felt wrong. The Nakamura meeting was gone. That bridge had burned the moment he'd sent the cancellation message. Millions of dollars in potential deals evaporated. Territory that could have expanded his influence across 3 countries, lost. Relationships he'd spent years building, damaged. All for 3 children he didn't know, and a signal that connected him to a sister he'd failed to save 15 years ago. I want to know who Catherine Hayes really is, Rayo Yi said. I want to know who she works for. I want to know where these children came from and who's waiting for them in Manila. And I want to know all of it in the next 30 minutes before that plane boards. Diho nodded slowly. And if we find proof, if this is what you think it is, then we stop it. Rayo Yi's voice was flat, empty, the tone that made men in the Seoul underworld step back without knowing why. Whatever it takes, whatever it costs. Boss, if we intervene, we expose ourselves. Airport security, police, possibly federal agents. We can't operate in the open like this. I know. You could lose everything, the empire you built, the protection we've maintained, all of it. I know. For 3 kids you've never met. Rayo Yi turned away from the security feed and looked Diho directly in the eyes. My sister was 7 years old when they took her. She had dark hair like that little girl. She wore a pink jacket the day she disappeared. And she tried to signal me that something was wrong, but I was 12 and stupid, and I didn't understand until it was too late. Diho's expression shifted. In 7 years of working together, Rayo Yi had never mentioned his sister, had never explained why he spent half his earnings on orphanages, had never revealed the wound that drove every decision he made. So yeah, Rayo Yi continued, I know what this costs, and I'm paying it anyway. Diho studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded and raised his tablet. Then we need to move fast, because Catherine Hayes just went into the restroom near gate 23, and when people get nervous, they make phone calls in private. Rayo Yi was already moving toward the security checkpoint. He didn't have a boarding pass, didn't have credentials, didn't have any legal right to enter the secure area, but he had something better. He had resources, he had contacts, and he had 30 minutes to become someone who could walk through airport security without triggering any alarms. Get me a ticket, he told Diho. Any flight, any destination, I just need to get through that checkpoint. On it. And Diho, Rayo Yi paused. If this goes wrong, if I get arrested or detained, you make sure those kids don't board that plane. I don't care how you do it. Pull a fire alarm. Call in a bomb threat. Ground the whole damn airport if you have to, but those children do not get on that flight. Diho's response was immediate. Understood. Rayo Yi's phone buzzed again. Another message from his man near gate 23. Blue coat back from restroom. Moving kids toward boarding area. Looks agitated. Flight starts boarding in 15 minutes. 15 minutes. Rayo Yi looked at the security checkpoint, at the lines of travelers shuffling forward, at the system designed to process people quickly and move them along. Somewhere beyond that barrier, 3 children sat with a woman who called herself their mother, but moved like their captor. 3 children who wore wrong clothes and carried no luggage and traveled with hollow eyes that had already seen too much. And one of them knew a signal that connected her to a world she should never have touched. A signal that said she understood what Rayo Yi's tattoos meant, that she knew predators came in expensive suits and professional smiles, that she was choosing to trust a criminal over the law because the law had already failed her. Diho's tablet pinged. Ticket purchased. Singapore Airlines Flight 405 to Tokyo. Boards at gate 31 in 1 hour. Confirmation sent to your phone. Rayo Yi checked his phone. The boarding pass appeared, digital and valid and completely fake in terms of his actual intention to use it. But it would get him through security, would give him access to the secure area, would put him on the same side of the barrier as 3 children whose mismatched lives told a story that most people would never notice. But Rayo Yi had spent 15 years noticing, and now he had 14 minutes to do something about it. The security line moved like molasses. Families shuffled forward, removing shoes and laptops, lifting children out of strollers, arguing with TSA agents about water bottles and oversized carry-ons. Business travelers tapped their feet impatiently, checking watches, sighing loud enough to communicate their superiority over the amateur travelers clogging the system. Rayo Yi stood in the middle of it all, perfectly still, his phone in his hand displaying the fake boarding pass, his eyes tracking every camera angle, every security officer, every potential complication. He'd removed his watch and emptied his pockets into the gray bin with practiced efficiency. The TSA agent barely glanced at him, too busy managing a woman who'd forgotten about the scissors in her purse. Rayo Yi moved through the metal detector without incident. The neck tattoos drew a few stares from other travelers, but airport security had seen worse. As long as he didn't set off alarms, he was just another passenger in expensive clothes heading somewhere important. 30 seconds later, he was through. Shoes back on, watch secured, phone pocketed, and somewhere ahead in this maze of gates and duty-free shops, a woman in a blue coat was trying to disappear with 3 children who didn't belong to her. Rayo Yi's earpiece buzzed. Diho's voice came through, quiet and controlled. You're in. Our guy at gate 23 says they're still at the seating area. Blue coat keeps checking her phone. Kids haven't moved from their chairs. I'm heading there now. Rayo Yi started walking, his long strides eating up distance while still maintaining the casual pace of a normal traveler. He passed a coffee shop where exhausted parents bribed children with pastries, past a bookstore where businessmen grabbed magazines they'd never read, past gate after gate of people waiting to board planes that would take them to lives and destinations that had nothing to do with trafficking and terror. Be careful, Diho warned. She's on edge if she spots you. She won't. But even as Rayo Yi said it, he knew it was a lie. Predators could sense each other. It was evolutionary. Survival instinct coded into the DNA of people who lived in worlds where mistakes meant death. Catherine Hayes had already seen him once, had already clocked his tattoos, his intensity, his refusal to back down. If she saw him again, she'd know. And cornered predators were the most dangerous kind. Gate 23 came into view around a corner. Rayo Yi slowed, positioning himself behind a group of tourists examining a duty-free display. From this angle, he could see the seating area clearly. Rows of connected chairs facing massive windows that looked out on the tarmac. And there, in the back corner, the blue coat. Catherine Hayes sat with perfect posture, her purse on her lap, her phone in her hand. She wasn't reading, wasn't scrolling, just staring at the screen like she was waiting for a message that would tell her whether to run or stay. The 3 children sat beside her in a row, Marcus on the left, staring at his hands. Timothy in the middle, head tilted back, eyes half closed. Roseline on the right, her pink jacket zipped up to her chin despite the terminal's warmth, her small fingers gripping the edge of her seat. Will the woman notice she's being stalked? Rayo Yi watched Catherine's eyes move across the terminal. She scanned the crowd with mechanical precision. Left to right to left, checking faces, checking exits, checking for threats in a way that normal mothers never did. Her body language screamed training, professional training. The kind that came from years of moving through spaces where discovery meant failure. Rayo Yi pulled out his phone and pretended to check emails while positioning himself closer. He moved to a seat 3 rows away, angling his body so he appeared focused on his screen, but maintained a clear line of sight to the group. From here, he could see details that the first encounter hadn't revealed. The way Catherine's left hand kept drifting toward her purse, not opening it, just touching it like she was confirming something was still there. The way Marcus's sneakers, those mismatched wrong-sized shoes, had actually rubbed raw spots on his heels. Dark stains that might have been blood. The way Timothy's eyes kept drifting shut, then snapping open with the jerky resistance of someone fighting sedation. And Roseline. God, Roseline. The little girl sat so still she barely seemed to breathe. Her eyes were open, staring at the window, but Rayo Yi could see the trembling. It started in her hands, small vibrations she tried to suppress by gripping the chair harder. Then it spread to her shoulders, her jaw, her whole small body fighting against the fear that wanted to explode into screaming or running or begging. How close is the girl to breaking? Rayo Yi had seen this before, had seen children in his world reach the point where silence became impossible, where the weight of terror exceeded the fear of consequences. Roseline was close, maybe minutes away, maybe seconds. The only thing holding her together was the same discipline that had allowed her to signal him in the first place. The training of a child who'd learned to survive in impossible situations. His earpiece crackled. "Boss, we've got a problem. Catherine Hayes isn't Catherine Hayes." Rayo Yi kept his eyes on his phone, his expression neutral. "Explain." "Ran her name through our contacts. Catherine Hayes exists. She's a real person. Elementary school teacher from Portland. But the real Catherine Hayes posted on social media 4 hours ago from her home. Photos of her cat. Complained about grading papers. She's definitely not at this airport." Stolen identity. Rayo Yi had expected this. Professional operations didn't use real names when moving illegal cargo. They built shells, created paper trails that looked legitimate but collapsed under real scrutiny. "Gets better," Diho continued. "The tickets were purchased yesterday with a credit card registered to a business called Pacific Family Services. Sounds legitimate, right? Adoption agency. Foster care. Except Pacific Family Services dissolved 6 months ago. The credit card shouldn't even work." But it did, because someone had kept the infrastructure alive specifically for transactions like this. Someone who needed the appearance of legitimacy without the actual oversight that came with real organizations. Yeah, which means whoever she's working for has access to dead companies and active credit systems. That's not amateur hour, boss. That's organized. Rayo Yi watched the fake Catherine Hayes check her phone again. Her jaw tightened. Whatever message she was waiting for hadn't arrived. Or worse, had arrived and said something she didn't want to hear. "Flight status," Rayo Yi asked quietly. "Boards in 11 minutes, still on time." 11 minutes. Rayo Yi calculated trajectories. If she boarded with the children, he could follow, could get on the same plane, could maintain surveillance for the 14-hour flight to Manila. But then what? He couldn't stop a plane mid-flight, couldn't confront her surrounded by witnesses and flight attendants and air marshals. And once they landed in Manila, she'd disappear into networks he didn't control, territories he didn't own. The children would vanish into systems designed specifically to make people untraceable. No, whatever happened had to happen here, now, in this terminal, before that boarding announcement crackled through the speakers. Catherine Hayes stood suddenly. The movement was sharp, decisive. She leaned down and said something to the children. Marcus nodded. Timothy struggled to his feet, swaying slightly. Roseline didn't move at first, her fingers still locked on the chair. Catherine's hand fell on her shoulder, squeezed once. Not gentle, not maternal. A command disguised as comfort. Roseline stood. They started walking. Not toward the gate. Toward the restroom corridor 20 feet away. Catherine in front, children following in their practiced formation. The blue coat disappeared around the corner. Rayo Yi waited 3 seconds, then followed. He moved casually, phone still in hand, just another traveler heading to the restroom before his flight. The corridor was narrow, lined with bathrooms on one side and a janitor's closet on the other. Empty except for Catherine and the children standing outside the women's restroom. Catherine saw him immediately. Her body went rigid. For just a moment, their eyes met across the corridor. Recognition flared in her gaze. Not surprise, confirmation. She'd already known he was following, had probably spotted him the moment he'd cleared security. This restroom detour wasn't about need. It was about testing. About seeing if the tattooed stranger would follow them into a semi-private space where confrontation became inevitable. What will Rayo do in a public space? The question hung between them like a challenge. Catherine's hand moved to her purse, not opening it, just resting there, ready. Rayo Yi didn't break stride, didn't slow down, didn't acknowledge her beyond the initial eye contact. He walked past the group as if they didn't exist, pushed through the men's restroom door and disappeared inside. But he didn't stay. The moment the door closed behind him, he pulled out his phone and activated the camera. Positioned it in the crack of the slightly opened door. The angle wasn't perfect. But it gave him a view of the corridor. Of Catherine standing with the children, her expression calculating. She said something to Marcus. The boy nodded and took Timothy's hand. Then Catherine ushered Roseline into the women's restroom, the door swinging shut behind them. Rayo Yi's earpiece crackled. Did she make you? Yeah. What's the play? Good question. Rayo Yi watched through his phone's camera as Marcus and Timothy stood in the corridor alone. The older boy's eyes darted nervously, looking for help, looking for escape, looking for anything that made sense in a situation that had stopped making sense the moment a stranger with neck tattoos had confronted them at security. Then Marcus did something unexpected. He looked directly at the men's restroom door, at the crack where Rayo Yi's camera lens barely protruded, and he mouthed 2 words. Help us. Rayo Yi's chest tightened. Not just Roseline, all 3 of them. All 3 children were trapped in this. All 3 understood enough to know that the woman in the blue coat wasn't safety, that the plane they were about to board wouldn't take them home, that whatever waited in Manila wasn't family or vacation or anything resembling the life that children deserved. The women's restroom door opened. Catherine emerged, Roseline beside her. The little girl's face was red, like she'd been crying or had been forced to splash cold water to hide evidence of crying. Catherine's expression was harder now, more resolved. Whatever decision she'd been wrestling with in the restroom had been made. She grabbed Roseline's hand, not gently, with the firm grip of someone ensuring their cargo couldn't run. Then she started walking back toward the gate, the children following. But her pace was faster now, urgent. The body language of someone who knew their window of opportunity was closing. Rayo Yi stepped out of the restroom the moment they rounded the corner. Diho's voice crackled in his ear. She's heading back to gate 23. Boarding starts in 8 minutes. I know, Rayo Yi followed, maintaining distance but staying close enough to react if she bolted. The corridor opened back into the main terminal. More travelers, more witnesses, more complications. Catherine reached the gate and didn't sit down. Instead, she positioned the children near the boarding area, close to the gate agent's desk. Prime position for early boarding. The kind of spot that families with small children typically occupied. Except these children weren't excited, weren't pointing at the plane visible through the window. They just stood there, 3 small statues with hollow eyes and mismatched clothes. The gate agent made an announcement, pre-boarding for families with small children and passengers needing assistance. Catherine's hand tightened on Roseline's shoulder. She stepped toward the gate agent, boarding passes already in hand. Rayo Yi's phone buzzed, a message from Diho. Boss, we've got something. Pacific Family Services had a director. Woman named Victoria Chen. Disappeared 8 months ago. Police never found her, but her credit cards, still active, still being used. Which meant Victoria Chen was either dead and her identity had been stolen, or she'd gone underground and was running operations under a ghost identity. Either way, the organization Catherine worked for had infrastructure, had resources, had enough power to keep dead companies and missing persons active in financial systems. The gate agent smiled at Catherine, checked the boarding passes, nodded. Go ahead, ma'am, have a good flight. Catherine started walking toward the jetway. The children followed. Marcus looked back over his shoulder one last time, his eyes scanning the terminal desperately. Looking for someone, anyone. Looking for the stranger with the tattoos who'd confronted them at security and then disappeared. Rayo Yi stood 50 feet away, partially hidden behind a support column. Every instinct in his body screamed to move, to run forward, to physically stop them from boarding. But airport security had eyes everywhere. Cameras, guards, systems designed specifically to prevent people from rushing gates and stopping passengers. If he moved now, he'd be tackled, arrested, removed, and Catherine would board with the children while he was in custody. His earpiece crackled. Boss, they're boarding. I can see that. What do you want me to do? Rayo Yi watched Rosaline's small hand grip the railing as she started up the jetway. Watched her look back once, her eyes sweeping the terminal with the desperate hope of a child who still believed in rescue. Their eyes met across the distance. Just for a second. Just long enough for Rayo Yi to see the exact moment that hope died. The moment she realized the stranger who'd recognized her signal wasn't going to save her after all. Her fingers moved. One last time, tap, 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 tap. Then she disappeared into the jetway. Catherine's blue coat followed. The gate agent picked up the microphone to announce general boarding. Boss, Diho's voice was urgent now. They're on the plane, if we're going to do something. Pull the fire alarm, Rayo Yi said quietly. Silence on the other end. Then, are you serious? Pull it, now. Ground this entire terminal. I need those passengers off that plane. That's going to bring every security officer in the airport, federal agents, possible terrorism response. I know. They'll find out it was us. We'll be burned, completely exposed. I know, Rayo Yi's voice was ice. But those children are not getting on that plane, so pull the fucking alarm. 3 seconds of silence. Then Diho's response, calm and loyal and completely insane. Fire alarm in 30 seconds. Get ready for chaos. Rayo Yi started walking toward gate 23. Not running, not drawing attention, just moving with purpose. Somewhere in the terminal, Diho was about to trigger every emergency protocol the airport had. Alarms would scream. Sprinklers might activate. Passengers would panic. Flights would be grounded. And in the middle of that manufactured chaos, 3 children would have one more chance at being saved. The gate agent looked up as Rayo Yi approached. Her professional smile faltered slightly when she saw the tattoos. Sir, are you boarding this flight? No, Rayo Yi said, but you're about to evacuate it. The fire alarm started screaming before she could respond. The fire alarm cut through the terminal like a chainsaw through silence. High-pitched, relentless, designed to trigger immediate panic. Within seconds, the carefully organized chaos of the airport collapsed into actual chaos. Travelers jumped from their seats, grabbing bags and children and phones. Gate agents abandoned their posts, following evacuation protocols they'd practiced but never expected to use. Overhead announcements crackled in 3 languages, instructing everyone to proceed calmly to the nearest exit. No one proceeded calmly. Rayo Yi moved against the flow of panicking passengers, his eyes locked on the jetway where Catherine Hayes and 3 children had disappeared 30 seconds earlier. The gate agent who'd been about to question him was already gone, swept up in the evacuation procedure. The boarding door stood open, unguarded, but passengers were now streaming back out of the jetway, confused and frightened, flight attendants ushering them into the terminal with practiced urgency. Diho, Rayo Yi said quietly into his earpiece, his voice barely audible over the alarm. I need eyes on the jetway exit. Blue coat and 3 kids. Don't let them disappear into the evacuation. Already on it. 2 of our guys positioned at the terminal exits. If she tries to run, we'll funnel her your direction. Rayo Yi positioned himself near a support column, partially hidden but with a clear view of passengers emerging from gate 23. Families stumbled out, parents clutching children, everyone moving with the jerky urgency of people who didn't know if the emergency was real or drill. Business travelers looked annoyed, already on phones complaining to assistants. Elderly passengers moved slowly, confused, requiring help from flight attendants. Then the blue coat appeared. Catherine Hayes emerged from the jetway with the mechanical calm of someone who trained for crisis situations. Her face showed concern, but not panic. The kind of controlled worry that looked appropriate for the circumstances but didn't actually indicate fear. She held Rosaline's hand. Marcus and Timothy followed close behind, their hollow eyes now wide with the confusion of yet another incomprehensible change in their already incomprehensible day. Catherine scanned the terminal with those same predatory movements Rayo Yi had noticed before, looking for threats, looking for opportunities, looking for the fastest route to disappear into the evacuation flow. Her eyes swept right past Rayo Yi's position. She hadn't spotted him yet. Too focused on escape routes. She started moving toward the main terminal exit, following the crowd, using the chaos as camouflage. Smart. In 60 seconds she'd be outside. In 5 minutes she'd be in that white van. In 10 minutes she'd be on a highway heading anywhere that wasn't here. The children would disappear into whatever backup plan her organization had for situations exactly like this. Rayo Yi stepped into her path. Not blocking her completely, not causing a scene, just appearing in her line of travel with the timing of someone who'd predicted her exact trajectory. Their eyes met. This time, Catherine's professional mask cracked completely. Raw fear flashed across her face before she could suppress it, because she understood what Rayo Yi had just done. Understood that the fire alarm wasn't coincidence, wasn't accident. Was targeted intervention by someone with enough resources and enough insanity to shut down an entire airport terminal. Going somewhere, Rayo Yi asked quietly. Catherine's hand moved toward her purse, defensive reflex, but she caught herself, remembering the crowd, the witnesses, the evacuation protocols that had security guards and airport staff everywhere. Whatever was in that purse couldn't be revealed here. "Get away from my children," she said loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear, playing the threatened mother card again, hoping someone would intervene on her behalf. But the crowd was too focused on evacuation, too worried about fire or bombs or whatever had triggered the alarm. A domestic dispute between a tattooed man and a professional-looking woman barely registered as worth noticing. Rayo Yi leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper only Catherine could hear. "You have 2 choices. Come with me quietly to somewhere we can talk, or I start screaming that you're kidnapping these children and let airport security sort it out while we all wait for police. Your choice. 5 seconds. Catherine's jaw tightened, her eyes calculated. She glanced at the exits, at the security guards managing the evacuation, at the children standing between her, and whatever decision she was about to make. Then she looked back at Rayo Yi's neck tattoos, and something in her expression shifted. Not just fear, recognition, understanding. Like she'd finally placed what those specific marks meant in the hierarchy of criminal organizations. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Someone who knows exactly what you are." Rayo Yi stepped aside slightly, gesturing toward a corridor that led away from the main evacuation flow. "There's a VIP lounge 30 meters that direction. Private. Quiet. We're going to have a conversation." "I'm not going anywhere with you." "Then I make a scene. Right here. Right now. You really want to explain to airport security why these children's clothes don't fit, why they have no luggage, why their names match a dead company's credit card." Catherine's face drained of color. How did he know about Pacific Family Services? The question was written clearly in her widening eyes, but she didn't ask it. Asking would be admitting, and professionals never admitted anything they didn't have to. "Fine," she said through clenched teeth. 5 minutes, then we're leaving." We'll see. Rayo Yi started walking toward the VIP lounge corridor. Catherine hesitated, then followed, the children trailing behind her. Marcus looked at Rayo Yi with barely concealed hope. Timothy swayed slightly, still fighting whatever sedative kept him docile. Rosaline's fingers moved unconsciously, tapping that rhythm against her pink jacket. Tap, 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 tap. The corridor was mercifully empty. Most travelers had evacuated toward the main exits. The VIP lounge entrance appeared ahead, marked with subtle gold lettering and a card reader that required membership access. Rayo Yi pulled out a black card he'd acquired 3 years ago specifically for situations where privacy mattered more than legitimacy. The door clicked open. Inside, the lounge was deserted. Leather chairs arranged around low tables. An unmanned bar area. Floor-to-ceiling windows looking out at the tarmac where emergency vehicles were now gathering, lights flashing. The evacuation had achieved exactly what Rayo Yi needed: empty spaces and distracted security. He stepped inside and held the door. Catherine entered slowly, her eyes already searching for alternate exits. There was only one, a service entrance partially hidden behind the bar. Rayo Yi positioned himself between Catherine and that door, cutting off escape routes, controlling the environment. Can he hold them without a badge? The question hung in the air between them. Rayo Yi had no legal authority, no jurisdiction, no right to detain anyone anywhere. If Catherine screamed, if she fought back, if she simply walked out, he had no legitimate power to stop her. But legitimacy and power weren't the same thing, not in his world. Sit, Rayo Yi gestured to the leather chairs. We don't have time for... Sit. The command in his voice left no room for negotiation. Catherine sat slowly, her purse clutched on her lap. The children remained standing, uncertain. Rayo Yi pulled out his phone and sent a quick text to D-Ho. VIP lounge, Terminal B needs security on door. No interruptions. The response came back immediately. Done. You've got 10 minutes before airport security finishes evacuation sweep. 10 minutes. Rayo Yi pocketed his phone and turned his full attention to Catherine Hayes, who wasn't Catherine Hayes. Up close, in the lounge's better lighting, he could see details that the terminal chaos had hidden. The slight tremor in her hands, the exhaustion carved into the lines around her eyes, the way she kept glancing at the children with something that almost looked like guilt. Let's start simple, Rayo Yi said. What's your real name? Catherine Hayes. Try again. Silence. Catherine's fingers tightened on her purse. That purse. Rayo Yi had watched her touch it compulsively throughout the entire encounter, checking it, confirming something. What was in there that mattered enough to risk repeated exposure? The purse, Rayo Yi said. Put it on the table. No. I'm not asking. You have no authority. Rayo Yi moved so fast Catherine didn't have time to react. He crossed the space between them in 2 strides, grabbed the purse, and yanked it from her grip. Catherine lunged forward, her professional calm completely shattered, but Rayo Yi was already stepping back, the purse in his hands. Give that back! Her voice rose to a near shout. The children flinched, all 3 of them. Automatic response to raised voices that spoke volumes about what their recent experience had been like. Rayo Yi opened the purse. Standard contents. Wallet, phone, lipstick, tissues, nothing remarkable until his fingers found the zippered interior pocket. He pulled out a small padded envelope, the kind used for shipping valuables, heavy, something solid inside. He opened it. 4 passports fell onto the table, not American passports, Philippine passports. He opened the first one. Rosaline's photo stared back at him, but the name was different. Maria Santos, age 7. The second passport showed Marcus under the name Carlos Santos, age 9. The third showed Timothy as Juan Santos, age 6. The fourth was Catherine herself, listed as Alina Santos, age 34. Backup identities, Rayo Yi said quietly. For when you land. Catherine Hayes boards in the U.S. with 3 American children. Alina Santos deplanes in Manila with 3 Filipino kids. Different names. Different nationalities, completely untraceable. What is in the woman's suitcase? The question had haunted Rayo Yi since he'd noticed the absence of luggage. But now he understood. There was no suitcase. Or rather, the important cargo wasn't in checked baggage. It was these passports, these identities, the infrastructure to make 3 American children disappear and reappear as Filipino orphans ready for whatever market waited on the other side. Catherine, or Alina, or whoever she really was, didn't deny it, didn't try to explain. She just stared at the passports on the table like they were grenades with pulled pins. "How much are they worth?" Rayo Yi asked. "What's the going rate for 3 healthy American kids in Manila?" The woman's face contorted, anger and fear and something else, something that looked almost like shame. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." Rayo Yi's voice dropped to the cold, dead tone that made men in Seoul's underworld step back without knowing why. "I understand you're trafficking children using stolen identities and dead companies. I understand those kids are drugged and terrified. I understand you were about to fly them across international borders to sell them to whoever put up the highest bid." "It's not like that." "Then what is it like?" Rayo Yi leaned forward. "Explain it to me. Explain why Roseline knows a signal that only exists in my world. Explain why these boys can barely stand upright. Explain why none of them have luggage or toys or anything that suggests they're actually your children." The woman's mouth opened, closed. No explanation came, because there was no explanation that didn't end with confession. She looked at the passports, at the children, at Rayo Yi's neck tattoos. Then her eyes locked onto the ink with sudden intensity, and her expression shifted to something close to terror. Why is she so terrified of his tattoos? Rayo Yi had noticed her reaction earlier, but dismissed it as general fear of criminals. Now he realized it was specific. She wasn't just scared of what he might do. She was scared of who he was, which meant she recognized the marks, understood their meaning, knew enough about the Seoul underworld to place him in the hierarchy. "You know what these mean," Rayo Yi said, touching his neck. "Don't you?" The woman's breathing accelerated. "Your Yi family. You're—" She stopped, like saying the name out loud would make everything worse. "Rayo Yi," he confirmed. "And now you understand why this conversation is going to end very differently than you planned." The woman stood abruptly, her professional composure completely destroyed. "You don't know what you're interfering with. The people I work for." "Don't scare me," Rayo Yi cut her off. "I've gone to war with Yakuza, triads, and cartels. Your organization, whoever they are just names I haven't killed yet. They'll come after you. Let them." Rayo Yi pulled out his phone and took photos of all 4 passports. Documentation, evidence, insurance. "But first, you're going to tell me everything. Where these children came from, where they were going, who's waiting for them in Manila, every name, every location, every detail." The woman looked at the exit, looked at the children, looked at Rayo Yi's unwavering expression, calculating whether she could fight, run, or negotiate her way out. But the math didn't work in her favor. She was alone with a man who just shut down an airport terminal, a man whose tattoos announced affiliation with an organization known for solving problems through violence, a man who clearly didn't care about legal consequences. "And if I tell you," her voice cracked, "what then? You let me go." Rayo Yi almost laughed. Let her go. This woman who drugged children and fabricated identities and would have sold them to the highest bidder if he hadn't intervened. But he kept his expression neutral. "That depends on how useful your information is." His earpiece crackled. Deho's voice, urgent. "Boss, airport security just announced they're clearing the fire alarm. False alarm. They're going to start letting people back into the terminal in 5 minutes. You need to move." 5 minutes. Rayo Yi looked at the woman, at the children, at the passports spread across the table like evidence in a trial that would never happen. 5 minutes to get answers, to decide what came next, to figure out how to save 3 children without destroying his entire empire in the process. "Start talking," Rayo Yi said. "You've got 4 minutes to convince me not to hand you over to airport police with those passports as evidence." The woman's face went pale, because they both knew what that evidence meant. Federal charges, human trafficking, international kidnapping, A life sentence if she was lucky. Death penalty if the prosecutors were motivated. Rosaline's small voice cut through the tension. Is he going to save us? The question was directed at Marcus, not at Rayo Yi or the woman. Like children who'd learned to speak about adults in third person because direct questions brought punishment. Marcus's hand tightened on his brother's shoulder. He looked at Rayo Yi with eyes that had seen too much and believed too little. I don't know, Marcus whispered back. But Rayo Yi heard it. Heard the fragile hope in a 9-year-old's voice. Heard the same desperate uncertainty his sister must have felt 15 years ago when strange men led her away and no one came to help. He knelt down to Rosaline's level, his tattooed hand reaching out slowly, carefully, letting her see the movement before it happened. She flinched but didn't pull away. Rayo Yi's fingers gently covered her small, trembling hand, the hand that had tapped out a signal meant for ghosts and found a monster instead. Yes, Rayo Yi said quietly, his voice carrying a certainty that made the woman in the chair go rigid with fear. I'm going to save you. Then he stood and turned back to the woman. 3 minutes, talk. The woman in the blue coat stared at Rayo Yi like he just asked her to cut off her own hand. Her mouth opened, closed. The professional facade she'd maintained through security checkpoints and boarding procedures had completely shattered, leaving behind something raw and desperate. Fear, yes, but also calculation. She was still running scenarios, still looking for the angle that let her escape. 3 minutes, Rayo Yi repeated, his voice flat and cold. Or I make one phone call and airport police find us here with 4 fake passports and 3 terrified children. Your choice. The woman's hands trembled. She glanced at the children, then back at Rayo Yi. You don't understand what you're asking. The people I work for, they don't forgive. 2 minutes 45 seconds. They'll kill me. If I talk, they'll have to stand in line. Rayo Yi's jaw tightened. Because if you don't start talking in the next 30 seconds, I'll do worse than kill you. I'll make sure you survive long enough to face every parent of every child you've moved, and I'll make sure they know exactly where to find you. The threat landed. The woman's face drained of color, because people like her understood that death was sometimes mercy, that there were fates worse than a quick end. Fates that involved angry parents and criminal justice systems and the slow, grinding horror of consequences that never stopped coming. Okay, she whispered. Okay, just please. Rayo Yi waited. Behind him, he could hear the fire alarms echo fading. The evacuation was ending. Soon the terminal would flood with returning passengers. Soon security would sweep through the VIP lounges. Soon his window of opportunity would close entirely. My real name is Sarah Chen. I was Victoria Chen's daughter. The words came out rushed, desperate. Pacific Family Services was my mother's company, legitimate at first, real adoption agency, real families, real children who needed homes. Then the money got tight, regulations got harder, and someone made my mother an offer. What kind of offer? Rayo Yi's voice remained emotionless, but his hands had curled into fists at his sides. Transport services, high-value clients who wanted specific children, American children, healthy, young, the kind that international adoption made nearly impossible to get legally. Sarah's voice cracked. My mother said no at first, but they kept coming back, kept offering more money, and when she finally said yes, they owned her. Who's they? I don't know, I swear I don't know names, just contacts, phone numbers that change every month, bank accounts in countries I've never heard of. My mother handled the client side. I just did transport, just moved the packages from pickup to delivery. Packages, Rayo Yi's stomach turned. That's what these children were to Sarah Chen, not people, not lives. Packages to be moved efficiently from point A to point B. Where did these 3 come from? Rayo Yi gestured to the children standing frozen near the window. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she kept talking. Different places. The girl, Roseline, was supposed to be a private arrangement. Family in LA wanted a closed adoption but didn't want to wait years for legal channels. They hired my mother. But then the family backed out, changed their minds, and by then, Roseline was already in the system. What system? The holding house, in San Bernardino, where we keep children between acquisition and delivery. Sarah said it like she was describing a storage facility. Once they're in, they can't go back. Too many questions, too much risk, so they get reassigned to different clients. Rayo Yi felt rage building in his chest, hot and violent. He forced it down. Emotion was useless here. Information mattered. And the boys. The older one, Marcus, he was a street kid, found in Seattle. No family, no one looking for him, easy acquisition. Sarah's voice had gone mechanical, reciting facts without processing their horror. The younger one, Timothy, that one was different. She stopped. Rayo Yi waited, but Sarah had gone silent, staring at Timothy with something that looked almost like guilt. Different how? Rayo Yi pressed. He had a family, parents, sister, but the parents owed money to someone. Gambling debts, the kind that don't get forgiven, so they made a trade. The words hung in the air like poison. Parents who traded their 6-year-old son to pay off debts. Rayo Yi had seen terrible things in 15 years of underworld operations, had witnessed violence and betrayal in every dark corner of human nature. But this, selling your own child to bookies, that was a new circle of hell. Timothy stood near the window, his hollow eyes unfocused, his small body swaying slightly from whatever sedative kept him docile. He had no idea, probably didn't even remember his real family anymore. Just knew that the world was a place where people moved you around and nothing you wanted mattered. Where were you taking them? Rayo Yi asked. Manila, there's a facility there. Private compound. Clients come in, make their selections, arrange transport to whatever country they're from. Happens every month, like an auction. An auction for children. Rayo Yi's hands tightened until his knuckles went white. And these 3 were the merchandise. Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face now. I didn't want this, I swear I didn't, but my mother disappeared 8 months ago, just vanished. And the organization said if I didn't finish her contracts, they'd make sure I disappeared too. They have my passport, my real identity, everything. I'm as trapped as... She stopped herself, but the damage was done. As trapped as the children. That's what she'd been about to say. As if her situation was somehow equivalent to drugged 6-year-olds being sold at auctions. Rayo Yi's earpiece crackled. Diho's voice urgent. Boss, security's doing floor sweeps. Terminal reopening in 90 seconds. You need to extract now. 90 seconds. Rayo Yi looked at Sarah Chen, at the passports on the table, at 3 children who just had their entire nightmare confirmed out loud. He could call the police, hand over Sarah and the evidence and let the legal system handle it. But legal systems moved slowly. Required trials and evidence chains and bureaucracy that took months. And in those months, the organization Sarah worked for would vanish, would relocate operations, would start moving different children through different channels. No, this required a different kind of justice. The kind that came fast and final and sent a message that reverberated through underworld networks. But first, he needed the children safe. Needed them somewhere that wouldn't ask questions about missing luggage or fake passports, or why a tattooed criminal had 3 kids in a VIP lounge. The holding house, Rayo Yi said to Sarah. San Bernardino, address. I can't. Address, now. Sarah recited it. Rayo Yi typed it into his phone and sent it to Diho with a single instruction. Send team, quietly. Then he turned to the children. Marcus was watching the entire exchange with wide eyes, processing everything Sarah had said. Understanding, perhaps for the first time, the full scope of what had almost happened to them. Rosaline had her arms wrapped around herself, rocking slightly. And Timothy. Timothy had gone very still. His glazed eyes had focused, sharpened. Like whatever sedative kept him docile was wearing off and reality was crashing back in. He stared at Sarah with the kind of hatred that shouldn't exist in 6-year-old faces. You said my mommy loved me, Timothy whispered. His voice was small but clear, cutting through the adult conversation like a knife. You said she wanted me to have an adventure. Sarah's face crumpled. I'm sorry, I had to say something. You lied. Timothy's hands were shaking. His whole body was shaking. My name isn't even on the ticket, is it? You called me Timothy Hayes, but that's not my name. If he isn't who she says, who is he? The question cut through Rayo Yi's chest, because Timothy was right. The boarding passes, the passports, everything had listed him as Timothy Hayes. But that wasn't his real name. That was the identity Sarah had fabricated to move him. Across borders. His real name, his real family, his real life had been erased the moment Sarah's organization acquired him. "What's your real name?" Rayo Yi asked gently. Timothy looked at him with eyes that had aged far beyond 6 years. Daniel Park. My daddy called me Danny." Daniel Park, not Timothy Hayes, not Juan Santos. A real boy with a real name whose parents had traded him like currency. Rayo Yi filed the name away in the part of his mind where he kept debts that needed paying. Somewhere in Seattle, 2 parents who'd gambled away their son were living their lives, probably relieved they'd escaped their debts. They wouldn't be living those lives much longer. "Okay, Daniel," Rayo Yi said. "I'm going to make sure you're safe, all 3 of you." Marcus stepped forward suddenly, his voice sharp with the desperate authority of a 9-year-old trying to protect the only family he had left. "How do we know you're not just another one of them? How do we know you won't take us somewhere worse?" Valid question. Logical question. The kind of question children asked when every adult in their recent memory had been a liar or a kidnapper or both. Rayo Yi had tattoos that screamed criminal, had just shut down an airport terminal with a fire alarm, had cornered them in a private lounge without any legal authority. Why should they trust him? Is there anyone left to trust? The question echoed in the space between them. These children had been betrayed by parents, by systems, by every structure that should have protected them. Trust was a luxury they couldn't afford, but survival required taking risks, required choosing between bad options and hoping you picked the one that killed you slowest. Rayo Yi pulled out his phone and showed Marcus a photo. It was old, worn from being saved and resaved across multiple devices over 15 years. A little girl in a pink jacket, smiling at the camera, her dark hair falling across her face. His sister. The reason he spent half his earnings on orphanages. The reason he'd recognized Roseline's signal. The reason he was risking everything for 3 children he'd never met. "Her name was Jae-yeon," Rayo Yi said quietly. "She was 7 when people like Sarah took her. I was 12. I didn't know how to save her. Didn't understand what was happening until it was too late. She's gone now, has been for 15 years. But I promised myself I'd never let it happen again if I could stop it." Marcus stared at the photo, then at Rayo Yi's face, searching for deception, searching for the lie beneath the words. But Rayo Yi let him look, let him see the grief that never really healed, let him see the truth that most people never got close enough to witness. "We don't have much time," Rayo Yi continued. "The airport's reopening. Security will sweep this lounge in 60 seconds. You have to decide right now. Come with me or stay with her and get on whatever flight they rebook you on." What happens if the flight is called? The question didn't need answering. They all knew. If Singapore Airlines rebooked the Manila flight, Sarah would get new boarding passes, would move the children through security again, this time with heightened awareness and tighter control, would drug them more heavily to prevent resistance, would complete the delivery to that auction facility where clients made selections like they were shopping for furniture. Roseline made the decision. She stepped away from the window, away from Sarah, and walked directly to Rayo Yi. Her small hand reached out and gripped his jacket, not asking permission, claiming safety. "I choose him," she said quietly. Marcus hesitated for 3 more seconds. Then he grabbed Daniel's hand and pulled him forward. "We stay together, all 3 of us. If you're lying, if you're another one of them, I'll find a way to make you pay." 9 years old and already thinking like a soldier. Rayo Yi recognized that hardness, had worn it himself at 12 when the world taught him that threats were sometimes the only currency that mattered. "Fair enough," Rayo Yi said. Then he turned to Sarah. "You're going to walk out of this terminal alone. You're going to get in that white van. And you're going to drive to the San Bernardino address and wait for my people to arrive. If you run, I'll find you. If you warn your organization, I'll make sure every law enforcement agency in 3 countries has those passport photos by morning. Understand?" Sarah nodded, her face streaked with tears and terror. "What are you going to do with the children?" "Save them, which is more than you ever planned to do." Rayo Yi's earpiece crackled. "Boss, security's in the terminal. They're checking lounges. 30 seconds. Rayo Yi grabbed the 4 passports from the table and shoved them in his jacket. Evidence. Insurance. Proof that could destroy careers and organizations if used correctly. Then he pulled out his phone and opened a messaging app that routed through encrypted servers in countries that didn't cooperate with international law enforcement. He typed a message to a contact he hadn't used in 3 years. A woman who ran an underground network for abused children. Not part of his criminal empire. Not someone he did business with. Just someone who owed him a favor from years ago when he'd eliminated a trafficking ring that had been hunting her kids. "Need safe house. 3 children, ages 6-9, no questions, emergency extraction, can you help?" The response came back in 15 seconds. "Address incoming. Bring them now. I'll have medical and counseling ready." An address appeared. Rayo Yi memorized it and deleted the message. Then he looked at the 3 children standing in front of him. Roseline in her pink jacket. Marcus in his mismatched shoes. Daniel, who'd finally stopped swaying and was staring at Sarah with the kind of focus that suggested the sedatives were wearing off and clarity was returning. "We're leaving," Rayo Yi said. "Stay close. Don't talk to anyone. If anyone asks, you're my nephews and niece and we're late for a connection." "No one's going to believe that," Marcus said, eyeing Rayo Yi's tattoos. "Then we move fast enough that they don't get a chance to ask questions." The VIP lounge door opened. A security guard stepped inside, saw Rayo Yi and the children, frowned. "Sir, we're clearing all lounges. Need you to return to the main terminal." "Just leaving," Rayo Yi said, his tone casual. He gestured for the children to follow and started walking toward the door. The guard's eyes lingered on Sarah, still sitting in the leather chair, mascara running down her face. "Ma'am, you too. Everyone back to the main terminal." Sarah stood on shaking legs, made eye contact with Rayo Yi one last time. He could see the question in her expression. Was he really going to let her walk away, or was this a trap? Rayo Yi said nothing, just walked past the guard with 3 children following in a tight formation. But as he stepped into the corridor, he sent one final message to D-Ho. "Blue coat exits terminal alone in white van. Track her. Don't lose her. When she reaches San Bernardino, our team will be waiting." D-Ho's response was immediate. "Understood. Extraction route for the kids." "Alternate location. I'll send coordinates. And D-Ho, cancel everything for the next 48 hours. We're going dark." Because Rayo Yi had just declared war on an organization he didn't fully understand, had just stolen their merchandise and exposed their transport operative, had just made himself a target for people who specialized in making problems disappear permanently. But as he walked through the terminal with Roseline's small hand gripping his jacket, Marcus watching his back like a trained bodyguard, and Daniel finally starting to cry as the sedatives wore off and reality crashed in, Rayo Yi realized he didn't care. Some wars were worth fighting, even if they cost everything. The safe house was a 40-minute drive from the airport, tucked into a residential neighborhood in Anaheim where houses all looked the same and neighbors minded their own business. Rayo Yi pulled the rented SUV into the driveway of a modest 2-story home with drawn curtains and a lawn that needed mowing. The kind of place that disappeared into suburban normalcy. Perfect camouflage for the invisible. A woman opened the door before Rayo Yi could knock. Mid-40s, graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, eyes that had seen enough trauma to recognize it in others instantly. Maria Santos. No relation to the fake names on those Philippine passports. She ran one of the most effective underground networks in Southern California, sheltering children who fell through the cracks of official systems. 3, she asked, looking at the children clustered behind Rayo Yi. 3, ages 6, 7, and 9. They've been drugged. Need medical evaluation, food, and somewhere safe to sleep. Maria's expression hardened. She'd seen this before, seen too many children arrive sedated and terrified and broken. Bring them in. I've got rooms ready. Rayo Yi guided the children inside. The house smelled like soup and lavender, soft lighting, comfortable furniture. The kind of space designed to feel safe after too much time in places that weren't. Rosaline's grip on his jacket finally loosened. Marcus's hypervigilant posture relaxed slightly. Daniel stopped crying long enough to look around with the dazed confusion of someone waking from a nightmare into uncertain reality. I need to make some calls, Rayo Yi said to Maria. Can you? I've got them, take your time. Maria knelt down to the children's level, her voice gentle but professional. Hi there, my name is Maria, you're safe now. No one here is going to hurt you. Are any of you hungry? Daniel nodded, then burst into fresh tears. Because kindness, after prolonged cruelty, sometimes hurt worse than violence. Maria wrapped an arm around him and guided all three toward the kitchen, speaking quietly about sandwiches and apple juice and cartoon channels. Rayo Yi stepped back outside, pulling out his phone. Diho answered on the first ring. Boss, where are you? Secure location. Kids are safe. What's the status on Sarah Chen? Tracked her to the parking structure. White van exited airport 17 minutes ago, heading east on the 10. We've got 2 cars on her. She hasn't made any suspicious moves. Looks like she's actually going to San Bernardino like you told her. Good. Keep eyes on her until our team arrives. I want her contained, not dead. She has information we need. Understood, but boss, we've got a bigger problem. Diho's voice carried a tension that made Rayo Yi's spine straighten. I pulled the airport security footage like you asked. Started tracking Sarah Chen backward from when she entered the terminal. And you need to see this. Send it. Already done. Check your encrypted drive. Rayo Yi opened the secure cloud folder he shared with Diho. A video file loaded, timestamp from 7 hours earlier. The airport's main entrance, morning rush beginning. He watched Sarah Chen's white van pull up to the departure's curb. Watched her open the side door and help Rosaline, Marcus, and Daniel climb out. Standard procedure. Expected sequence. Then Diho's voice came through the phone. Keep watching. This is where it gets interesting. The timestamp jumped backward. 2 hours earlier. Different gate. Different part of the terminal. The video showed a young girl, maybe 8 years old, walking with a man in a business suit. The girl looked tired but not distressed. The man checked his phone, said something to her, then gestured toward a restroom. The girl nodded and walked inside. 30 seconds later, Sarah Chen emerged from that same restroom. Alone, no girl. What the hell? Rayo Yi muttered. Wait, Diho said. It gets worse. The timestamp jumped again. 5 hours earlier. Different gate. Different terminal. This time the video showed 2 boys, maybe 6 and 7, sitting with a woman who looked like their grandmother. Gray hair, kind face, reading them a book while they waited. The woman stood to throw something away at a nearby trash can. Just for a moment. Just long enough to turn her back. Sarah Chen materialized behind the boys like smoke. Said something. The boys looked confused but followed her. Just a few steps. Just far enough. Then they were around a corner and gone. The grandmother returned, book in hand, and her face transformed from calm to panic in the space of a heartbeat. She spun, searching, calling names that didn't carry over the silent security footage. She took them right from the terminal, Rayo Yi said, his voice hollow. Not from parking lots or streets, from inside the airport, from families. 3 different harvests over 6 hours, Diho confirmed. The girl from the restroom, the 2 boys while their grandmother wasn't looking, and then I found something else. How did she take them so quickly? The question burned through Rayo Yi's mind. Airport terminals had security everywhere. Cameras, guards, systems designed specifically to prevent exactly this kind of predation. But Sarah Chen had moved through those systems like they didn't exist, like she had access, like she knew exactly where the blind spots were. The video jumped to a 4th angle. This one showed Sarah Chen at a security checkpoint 3 hours before Rayo Yi had ever seen her. She walked through with a small backpack, no children visible, but she didn't go through the normal passenger screening. She went through a side entrance marked Authorized Personnel Only. A TSA agent saw her, nodded, waved her through without checking credentials. She had help, Rayo Yi said quietly. Yeah, and it gets worse. Diho's keyboard clicked in the background. I ran her entry credentials through our contact in airport IT. The badge she used to access that checkpoint, registered to a TSA supervisor named Marcus Chen. No relation listed, but the name can't be coincidence. Family members, father, brother. Brother, I pulled his employment records. He's been working airport security for 12 years. Perfect record. No complaints. No disciplinary actions. The kind of employee who's invisible because he does everything right. Except he was letting his sister access secure areas to harvest children from families in transit. Who is paying the security guards? Because this level of corruption didn't happen by accident. Didn't happen because one TSA supervisor felt like helping his criminal sister. This was systematic, organized, funded. There's more, Diho continued. I backtracked Sarah's movements over the past 6 months using facial recognition across airport camera feeds. She's been at this airport 47 times. Different gates, different terminals, always the same pattern. Enters through authorized personnel checkpoint. Spends 2 to 6 hours in the secure area. Leaves through public exits with children who didn't arrive with her. 47 times. 47 harvests. How many children had Sarah Chen moved through this single airport in 6 months? How many families had experienced the nightmare of turning around for 30 seconds and finding their child simply gone? Send me all of it, Rayo Yi ordered. Every video, every entry log, every face she interacted with. I want to know everyone who enabled this. Already compiled. But boss, this is bigger than one airport. I started checking other facilities. Found the same pattern at LAX, at San Francisco International, at SeaTac. Different operatives but same methodology, authorized personnel access, harvesting during high-traffic periods, children vanishing from secure areas while families wait for flights. How deep does this ring go? The question expanded in Rayo Yi's mind like a black hole swallowing light. This wasn't a local operation. Wasn't one sister and one corrupt TSA brother running a side business. This was infrastructure. Multiple airports, multiple operatives, multiple points of access that required security clearances and badge systems and the kind of institutional penetration that took years to build. How many children total? Rayo Yi asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. Silence on the other end. Then Diho's voice, quiet and grim. Conservative estimate based on verified footage, 237 in the past 18 months, just from airports. And that's only counting the ones where we can confirm facial matches to missing persons reports. 237 children, plucked from airport terminals while their families searched frantically, moved through security checkpoints by personnel who were supposed to protect them, processed through holding facilities like the one in San Bernardino, shipped to auctions in Manila or Bangkok or Dubai or wherever clients gathered to make selections. Rayo Yi's hands shook. He forced them still. Emotion was useless. Information mattered. Action mattered. The TSA supervisor, Marcus Chen, where is he now? Currently on shift. Works until 11 p.m. tonight. I've got surveillance on him, but boss, if we move on him, we tip off the entire network. These operations don't run without communication protocols. He disappears, they'll scatter. Then we don't make him disappear. We make him talk. Rayo Yi's mind raced through options. The Nakamura meeting was dead. His calendar was clear. Resources that should have been dedicated to expanding territory could be redirected. How many men can you pull together in the next 2 hours? For what purpose? Hostile extraction. We take Marcus Chen when his shift ends. Quietly. No witnesses. No airport cameras catching the grab. We need a location that's isolated but accessible. His home address is in Riverside, 40-minute drive from the airport, married. 2 kids, suburban neighborhood, not ideal for extraction. Married, 2 kids. Rayo Yi felt cold rage settle in his chest. Marcus Chen went home every night to his own children while enabling an organization that destroyed other families. Kissed his wife while his sister transported drugged kids across international borders. Lived a normal life built on the foundation of 237 nightmares. Find somewhere else, Rayo Yi said. His route home, gas station he stops at, coffee shop. Anywhere we can isolate him for 30 minutes without civilian interference. I'll scout it. What about Sarah Chen? She's already contained. Let her reach San Bernardino. Let her think she's safe. We'll deal with her after we extract information from her brother. And if he doesn't talk? Rayo Yi thought about Roseline's signal. About Daniel's tears when he realized his name wasn't even on the ticket. About Marcus, 9 years old, already thinking like a soldier because childhood had been beaten out of him by systems that treated kids like inventory. He'll talk, Rayo Yi said quietly. I'll make sure of it. The front door of the safe house opened. Maria stepped out, her expression concerned. They're eating now, but the little one, Daniel, he's asking for you, won't settle unless he knows you're still here. Because 6-year-olds who'd been drugged and trafficked and lied to didn't trust easily. Daniel had seen Rayo Yi make a promise, needed to confirm that promise hadn't evaporated the moment he walked away. I'll be there in 1 minute, Rayo Yi told Maria. Then to Diho, send me Marcus Chen's complete profile, work history, financial records, known associates, social media, everything. I want to know who he is before I take him apart. On it, and boss. The Nakamura family sent a message, there, not happy about the canceled meeting. Rayo Yi almost laughed. The Nakamura family. Their territory deals, their shipping routes, their carefully negotiated power structures. All of it seemed impossibly small compared to an organization that could harvest children from airport terminals for 18 months without being stopped. Tell them I had a family emergency, Rayo Yi said. Tell them I'll reschedule when it's resolved. They're threatening to pull out of all future negotiations. Let them, Rayo Yi ended the call. He stood in Maria's driveway for a moment, looking at the modest house with drawn curtains. Inside, 3 children who should never have survived were eating sandwiches and drinking apple juice. Outside, an organization that had built infrastructure across multiple airports was continuing to operate, harvesting more children, moving them through more checkpoints, feeding more auctions. Rayo Yi had spent 15 years building an empire in the shadows, had accumulated power and wealth and influence that let him move through underworld networks like a ghost, had answered to no one except his own code. And that code, forged in the moment his sister disappeared, had always been simple. Protect what matters, destroy what threatens it. He pulled up the video files Diho had sent. Watched Sarah Chen move through terminals like a predator who knew the terrain. Watched children vanish in the gaps between camera angles. Watched families transform from calm to panicked in seconds as they realized something irreplaceable had been stolen. His phone buzzed, a message from Diho with an attachment, Marcus Chen's complete profile, 12 years of employment records, a mortgage on a 4-bedroom house, a wife who worked as a dental hygienist, 2 daughters ages 8 and 10, soccer practice on Tuesdays, church on Sundays, PTA meetings, little league games, the perfect disguise of suburban normalcy hiding systematic evil. Rayo Yi opened another file. This one showed financial records pulled through contacts who specialized in tracking money that didn't want to be tracked. Marcus Chen's official salary, $58,000 annually. But his bank accounts showed deposits totaling over $400,000 in the past 18 months. Regular transfers, always from different sources. Always in amounts small enough to avoid automatic reporting requirements. Payment for access. Payment for silence. Payment for being the inside man who waved Sarah Chen through checkpoints and disabled cameras during harvesting operations and made sure no one asked questions when children disappeared from secure areas. The front door opened again. Daniel stood there, small and fragile in borrowed clothes that didn't quite fit. His eyes were clearer now, the sedatives finally wearing off completely. He looked at Rayo Yi with the desperate uncertainty of someone who'd been promised safety too many times by too many liars. "You're still here," Daniel said quietly. "I'm still here." Rayo Yi walked toward the house. "And I'm not leaving until I'm sure you're safe." "That lady, Sarah, is she going to come back?" "No." "How do you know?" Because Rayo Yi was about to make sure that Sarah Chen and her brother and everyone else involved in this operation learned what happened when you built empires on the backs of stolen children. Because he was about to redirect every resource he had toward dismantling an organization that had operated in plain sight for too long. But he didn't say any of that to Daniel. Instead, he knelt down to the boy's level and met his eyes with the kind of certainty that only came from absolute commitment. "Because I promised to keep you safe, and I keep my promises." Daniel studied his face for a long moment, then nodded and went back inside. Rayo Yi followed, pulling out his phone to send one final message to Di-ho. "Assemble the team. We move on Marcus Chen in 4 hours. Full extraction protocol. I want him alive and talking. And Di-ho, this isn't about territory anymore. This is war." The response came back immediately. "Understood. The ghosts are about to learn they chose the wrong children to take." The warehouse in San Bernardino sat empty and forgotten on the edge of an industrial district where nobody asked questions and nobody looked twice at vehicles coming and going at odd hours. Rayo Yi's team had secured it 3 hours earlier, sweeping for cameras, checking sight lines, ensuring the kind of privacy that allowed certain conversations to happen without interference. Sarah Chen sat bound to a metal chair in the center of the concrete floor, her blue coat stained and torn, her professional facade completely destroyed. Dried tears tracked through her makeup. Her hands shook despite the zip ties holding them behind her back. She'd driven here willingly, thinking cooperation might save her life. Now, surrounded by 6 men who moved like soldiers and answered to a tattooed kingpin, she was beginning to understand that survival wasn't guaranteed. Rayo Yi stood 10 feet away, reviewing files on Di-ho's tablet. Security footage, financial records, the complete digital autopsy of an organization that had operated in shadows for 18 months. Behind him, Marcus Chen hung from chains attached to an overhead beam, his TSA uniform stripped away, his face already swelling from the initial questioning. Blood dripped from his split lip onto the concrete floor with a steady rhythm that marked time like a metronome. "Please," Marcus whispered through broken teeth. "I told you everything. I gave you names, locations. I don't know anything else." Rayo Yi didn't look up from the tablet. "You gave me middle management, transporters, security contacts, the people who move the pieces. I want the player who controls the board." "I don't know. I swear I don't know who runs it." "Will he go too far?" The question hung in the warehouse air like smoke. Rayo Yi had spent 15 years operating in moral gray zones, making decisions that the law would call criminal and he called necessary. But this was different. This was personal, and personal vendettas had a way of consuming the people who pursued them. Di-ho stood near the warehouse entrance, his expression carefully neutral. He'd been with Rayo Yi long enough to recognize when his boss was approaching the edge. The place where justice blurred into revenge, where methods stopped being about information extraction and started being about inflicting pain because pain felt like the only adequate response to what had been done. "Boss," Di-ho said quietly, "we've got enough. Financial trails, personnel lists, the San Bernardino holding facility address. We can hand this to federal authorities and—" "And what?" Rayo Yi cut him off, his voice flat and cold. "Watch them build a case that takes 2 years while the organization relocates and rebuilds. Watch them prosecute Sarah and Marcus while the real architects disappear into jurisdictions that don't extradite. It's still the legal way. The legal way let them harvest 237 children from airports over 18 months. Rayo Yi finally looked up from the tablet, his eyes meeting Di-ho's with an intensity that made his second-in-command step back. The legal way didn't notice, didn't care, didn't stop them, so fuck the legal way. He turned back to Sarah. "The family package, what is it?" Sarah's eyes widened. "How do you know about?" "Answer the question." It's what we call the premium service. Clients who want multiple children at once. Siblings when available, but usually just. Compatible ages and appearances. Kids who can be sold as a set. Her voice cracked. Like Roseline, Marcus, and Daniel. 3 kids, different origins, packaged together because the client in Manila specifically requested a set that could pass as siblings. What is the family package? The words made Rayo Yi's stomach turn. Children selected and grouped not based on their actual relationships, but based on market demand. Like building a product line. Optimizing for client preferences. 3 traumatized kids forced to pretend they were family because that's what the buyer wanted. Who was the client? Rayo Yi asked. I don't have names, just account numbers. The system is designed so transporters never know buyers. We get pickup locations, delivery destinations, and payment confirmations. That's it. Marcus Chen made a choking sound from his chains. She's lying. She knows more than she's saying. Sarah always knew more. She was Victoria's daughter. She had access to the master files. Sarah's head whipped toward her brother. Shut up. You don't know what you're talking about. Master files. Rayo Yi stepped closer to Sarah, his shadow falling across her like a physical weight. What master files? Sarah pressed her lips together, defiant despite the fear radiating from every pore. Rayo Yi recognized that look. The last desperate stand of someone who still believed they held leverage, who thought silence might be the only currency they had left to trade. He pulled out his phone and opened a photo, the one he'd shown Marcus at the airport. His sister in the pink jacket, smiling at the camera, alive and safe in a moment that would never come again. He held it in front of Sarah's face. Her name was Jayon. She was 7. People like your mother took her 15 years ago. I never found her. Never got her back. Never even learned where they took her. Rayo Yi's voice was quiet now, almost gentle, but the gentleness carried more threat than any shout. So when I ask you about master files, understand that I'm not asking as a criminal looking for business intelligence. I'm asking as a brother who failed once and refuses to fail again. Sarah stared at the photo. Something in her expression shifted. Maybe recognition, maybe guilt, maybe just the dawning realization that Rayo Yi wasn't negotiating anymore. The files are encrypted, she whispered. Stored on my mother's laptop. She disappeared with it 8 months ago. I don't have access. Where would she go? If she was running, where would Victoria Chen hide? I don't know, maybe Mexico, maybe overseas. She had accounts in the Philippines, Thailand, Romania, places with loose extradition, places where she could keep operating. Rayo Yi finished the sentence. Victoria Chen hadn't disappeared because she was caught. She disappeared because she'd accumulated enough wealth to retire from the front lines while the infrastructure she built continued running. Who took over after she left? No one. That's the thing. The organization is decentralized, multiple cells operating independently. My mother built it that way specifically so no single point of failure could take down the whole network. Decentralized, multiple cells. The revelation made Rayo Yi's chest tighten, because that meant destroying Sarah and Marcus wouldn't stop the harvesting. Shutting down the San Bernardino holding facility wouldn't prevent new ones from opening. The infrastructure was designed to survive precisely this kind of intervention. How many cells? Rayo Yi asked. I don't know, I only knew the West Coast operation, but I heard rumors. East Coast, Europe, Asia. My mother used to brag that she'd built a system that could lose half its parts and still function. Di-ho swore quietly from the doorway. Boss, if she's telling the truth, this is bigger than we thought. We'd need federal resources, international cooperation. This is Interpol-level trafficking infrastructure. But Rayo Yi wasn't listening. He was thinking about Roseline's signal, about Daniel's tears, about Marcus asking if there was anyone left to trust. About 237 children whose families still didn't know where they'd gone. About his sister, Jayon, who might have been processed through this exact system 15 years ago before it had even formalized into the sophisticated network it was now. Can the children survive the fallout? The question cut deeper than any interrogation could. Because if Rayo Yi went to war with a decentralized international trafficking network, He'd paint targets on everyone connected to him. The safe house where Roseline, Marcus, and Daniel currently slept. Maria's entire organization. Every orphanage he'd anonymously funded. Every child he'd tried to protect would become leverage for an organization that specialized in acquiring and moving children. His phone buzzed. A message from Maria, just 3 words. "They're asking for you." The children, safe for now in a house with drawn curtains and cartoon channels and soup that smelled like lavender. Asking for the stranger with the tattoos who'd promised them safety in a world that had taught them promises meant nothing. Rayo Yi looked at Sarah Chen, at her brother hanging from chains, at the files documenting an organization too big to destroy through conventional means. Then he made a decision that would either save hundreds of children or get all of them killed. "Diho, get me a phone with international access, encrypted, untraceable." "Who are you calling?" "Everyone." Rayo Yi's voice carried a cold certainty that made even his own men shift uncomfortably. "Every contact I have in law enforcement. Every rival organization that's lost territory to trafficking networks. Every journalist who specializes in exposing corruption. Every federal agent who owes me favors. I'm burning every bridge I've built to make sure this network burns with them." "Boss, that's..." Diho stopped himself, because he'd seen that expression before. The look Rayo Yi got when he decided the cost didn't matter anymore, when survival became secondary to the principle at stake. "That's suicide," Marcus Chen finished from his chains. "You expose this network, you expose yourself. Every agency you contact will want to know how you got the information, what you were doing at that airport, why you have custody of 3 trafficked children without legal authority." "I know. They'll arrest you, prosecute you for kidnapping, interfering with federal investigations, operating a criminal enterprise. You'll lose everything." "I know." Rayo Yi turned to face Marcus fully. "But here's what you don't understand. I didn't build my empire to protect it. I built it because power is the only language that gets heard in the world your organization operates in. And now I'm going to use every ounce of that power to make sure that what happened to my sister, what almost happened to Roseline and Marcus and Daniel, what happened to 237 other children, never happens again." Sarah was crying now, full, desperate sobs that shook her whole body. "You're insane. You'll destroy yourself for what? 3 kids you don't even know." Rayo Yi pulled out his phone and opened the encrypted folder Diho had compiled. Hours of airport surveillance footage. Financial records tracing payments across international borders. Personnel lists nomming everyone from TSA supervisors to transportation coordinators to the holding facility staff. Documentation of a criminal infrastructure that had operated in plain sight because the systems designed to stop it had been compromised from the inside. "I'm not doing this for 3 kids, Rayo Yi said quietly. "I'm doing this for every child whose signal never got recognized, for every family whose moment of distraction became a lifetime of grief, for every brother who was 12 years old and stupid and didn't understand what the tap-tap-tap meant until it was too late." He started typing. The first message went to an FBI agent he'd once helped during an investigation that had overlapped with his territory. The agent owed him. Now Rayo Yi was calling in that debt. The message was simple. "I have evidence of international child trafficking network operating in U.S. airports. Multiple facilities, multiple cells, complete documentation attached. I'm the source. Come get me." The second message went to a journalist at the LA Times who specialized in exposing institutional corruption. "Airport security compromised by trafficking ring. 237 children in 18 months. Full evidence package attached. Story of the decade. You're welcome." The third message went to Interpol's anonymous tip line, then to ICE, then to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, then to every contact Rayo Yi had cultivated over 15 years of operating in shadows. He was lighting signal fires across every system simultaneously, making sure the story couldn't be buried or ignored or quietly disappeared. "Boss, stop." Diho's voice carried genuine fear now. "You send those messages, there's no taking them back. Every law enforcement agency in 3 countries will be looking for you within hours." "Good, Let them look. Let them find me sitting in a safe house with 3 rescued children and enough evidence to dismantle the network that took them. Let them try to decide whether to arrest the criminal who exposed it or thank him for doing their job. Rayo Yi hit send on the final message, watched the files upload to secure servers that would distribute them automatically even if he was arrested or killed. Insurance, documentation, truth that couldn't be silenced. His phone immediately started buzzing, responses coming in, questions, demands for meetings, threats of prosecution, but also gratitude, from the journalist who recognized the scope of the story, from the FBI agent who'd been investigating airport disappearances for months without making progress, from parents whose children had been taken and who finally had hope of answers. Sarah Chen was staring at him like he'd just detonated a bomb in the middle of the warehouse, which, in a way, he had. "You're going to prison," she whispered. "They'll charge you with everything: kidnapping, conspiracy, operating a criminal enterprise. You'll never see daylight again." "Maybe." Rayo Yi looked at his phone, at the messages still flooding in, at the machinery of justice finally, belatedly grinding into motion. "But those 3 kids sleeping in Maria's safe house, they'll see plenty of daylight, and 237 families will finally get answers about where their children went." Marcus Chen laughed. It was a broken, desperate sound. "You think you're a hero? You're just another criminal, just another piece of the same system that created us." "You're right," Rayo Yi said. "I am a criminal. I've broken laws, hurt people, built an empire on violence and fear. I'm not a hero, I'm not even a good person. But I'm a brother who failed once. And I'll burn everything I've built to make sure I don't fail again." His phone buzzed. A message from Maria, this time with a photo attached. 3 children asleep on a couch, wrapped in blankets, finally peaceful. Rosaline's hand still gripping a corner of Rayo Yi's jacket that Maria must have given her. Marcus and Daniel curled together like they'd been siblings their whole lives instead of just fellow prisoners. The caption read, "They're safe, thank you." Rayo Yi stared at the photo for a long moment. Then he forwarded it to Di-ho with a single instruction. "When the feds arrive, show them this. Make sure they understand what was at stake." Di-ho nodded slowly. "What about you?" "I'll be waiting, right here. When they come to arrest me, I want to look them in the eyes and make them explain why it took a criminal to stop something that should never have been allowed to start." Outside the warehouse, sirens began wailing in the distance. Multiple agencies responding simultaneously to the evidence dump Rayo Yi had just orchestrated, coming to secure the scene, arrest the suspects, process the evidence, do the work that should have been done 18 months ago when the first child disappeared from an airport terminal. Sarah Chen started screaming, pleading, promising information if Rayo Yi would just help her disappear before the authorities arrived. But Rayo Yi ignored her. His part in this story was finished. Whatever happened next, whether he spent the rest of his life in prison or somehow negotiated immunity for exposing the network, didn't matter anymore. What mattered was 3 children sleeping peacefully, and 237 families who would finally get phone calls explaining that their nightmare might not be over, but at least now it had a name, a face, a paper trail leading to justice. The sirens got closer. Rayo Yi's phone buzzed one last time, a message from an unknown number, just 2 words that made his blood run cold. "She's alive." No context, no explanation, just those 2 words that could mean anything or nothing. But Rayo Yi knew, somehow he knew, his sister, Jaeyeon. After 15 years, someone who'd seen his evidence dump, who'd recognized the name or the story or the code, was telling him that his sister had survived. He started typing a response, his hands shaking for the first time all night. But before he could finish, the warehouse doors exploded inward. Federal agents in tactical gear flooding in, weapons drawn, shouting commands. Rayo Yi raised his hands slowly, let his phone drop to the concrete, watched it shatter as boots surrounded him and hands pulled him to the ground, felt the cold metal of handcuffs close around his wrists. And as they read him his rights in a voice that echoed through the warehouse, Rayo Yi thought about Roseline's signal, about promises kept, about a brother who'd failed once but refused to fail again. The screen of his shattered phone flickered once before going dark, the message still visible for just a moment. She's alive. Then everything went black. The federal holding facility in downtown, Los Angeles, smelled like industrial cleaner and stale coffee. Rayo Yi sat in an interrogation room that had seen 1,000 confessions, his hands cuffed to a metal table, his expensive suit now wrinkled and stained. Across from him, 2 FBI agents reviewed files on their laptops while a third paced near the door, occasionally glancing at Rayo Yi like he was a bomb that might detonate without warning. It had been 18 hours since the warehouse. 18 hours of processing and photographing and fingerprinting. 18 hours of lawyers arriving and being dismissed because Rayo Yi refused counsel. 18 hours of agents trying to understand how a Korean mafia boss had ended up in possession of evidence that their own task forces had been chasing for months. The lead agent, a woman in her 40s named Director Chen, no relation to Sarah and Marcus, she'd made that abundantly clear, finally closed her laptop and leaned forward. Let me make sure I understand this correctly. You shut down an airport terminal with a false fire alarm, kidnapped 3 children from a suspected trafficker, held 2 suspects captive in an unauthorized facility, extracted confessions through methods I'm going to assume violated about 40 different laws, then dumped classified evidence to every law enforcement agency and media outlet you could find. And now you're sitting here refusing legal representation because, she checked her notes, because you want this over with. That's accurate, Rayo Yi said. You understand you're facing federal charges that could put you in prison for the rest of your life. I understand. Director Chen studied him with the exhausted frustration of someone who'd been trying to solve an impossible puzzle and had just discovered the solution was even more impossible than the problem. Why? Why would someone with your resources, your connections, your apparent intelligence, risk everything for 3 children you'd never met? Rayo Yi thought about the answer, about his sister's pink jacket, about 15 years of guilt that no amount of money or power could erase, about Roseline's signal transmitted across time and trauma to find the only person in that airport who could read it. Because someone had to, he said simply. Before Director Chen could respond, the door opened. A younger agent stepped in, whispered something urgent. Director Chen's expression shifted from frustration to surprise to something that might have been reluctant respect. There are people here to see you, she said to Rayo Yi. Families of the children you rescued. They're demanding access. I don't need to see them. They're not asking permission. They're here with lawyers and media and enough political pressure that my supervisors are actually considering it. So unless you want this to turn into an even bigger circus. Fine, Rayo Yi cut her off. 5 minutes, then I want to know about the message. What message? The one that said my sister is alive. Someone contacted me right before your team arrived. I want to know who. I want to know how they knew. And I want to know where she is. Director Chen's expression softened slightly. Just for a moment, because even hardened federal agents understood what it meant to spend 15 years wondering. We're working on tracing it. Encrypted sender, routed through multiple international servers. Could take days. Could be a hoax. It's not a hoax. Rayo Yi didn't know how he knew, but he did. 15 years of living in the underworld had taught him to recognize truth even when it came wrapped in mystery. The door opened wider. A man and woman entered, mid-30s, dressed in business casual clothes that looked hastily thrown on. The woman's eyes were red from crying. The man's jaw was set with the kind of rigid control that came from holding back emotions too big to release in public. Behind them, Maria from the safe house offered Rayo Yi a small nod of acknowledgement before stepping back into the hallway. You're Rayo Yi, the woman asked, her voice shook. I am. You saved our daughter, Roseline. The woman's composure cracked. She was supposed to be in a private adoption. We were told it fell through, that she'd been placed with another family. We spent 6 months fighting the courts trying to find her, and all that time. All that time she was being prepared for auction in Manila. Rayo Yi finished the sentence flatly. No sugarcoating, no gentle euphemisms. These parents deserved truth, however brutal. The father stepped forward, his hand extended. Then he saw the handcuffs and dropped it awkwardly. "Thank you. I know that's inadequate. I know words don't. I mean, you risked." He stopped, overwhelmed. Will they thank a murderer? The question hung in the air between them. Because Rayo Yi's neck tattoos told a story these parents could probably read even without underworld experience. They knew what he was. Knew that the man who'd saved their daughter had likely killed others. That the methods he'd used to extract information from Sarah and Marcus Chen weren't the kind discussed in polite company. "Your daughter is brave," Rayo Yi said, steering the conversation away from gratitude he didn't need. "She signaled for help when most children would have stayed silent. That takes intelligence and courage." "Where did she learn that signal?" Rosaline's mother asked. "The FBI showed us the footage, that rhythm she tapped. They said you recognized it immediately. It's a code used by children in certain situations. Street kids in Seoul, orphanages, places where direct communication isn't safe." Rayo Yi didn't mention his sister, didn't explain the personal connection. These parents didn't need to carry his grief on top of their own trauma. The door opened again. Another couple entered. Then a single mother. Then an older man who introduced himself as Marcus's grandfather. Within 5 minutes, the interrogation room had filled beyond capacity, federal agents looking increasingly uncomfortable as family members of the rescued children crowded in. Daniel's mother stood apart from the others, shame written across her face. Because she was the one who'd traded her son, who'd gambled him away to pay debts she shouldn't have accumulated. She couldn't meet Rayo Yi's eyes. "Mrs. Park," Rayo Yi addressed her directly. "Your son asked about you, wanted to know if you were looking for him." The woman flinched like she'd been struck. I thought, they told me he'd be safe, that he'd just work off the debt and come home." "They lied." No judgment in Rayo Yi's tone, just fact. "Daniel's name wasn't on the ticket because he was never meant to come home. You were a transaction, he was merchandise. They would have kept him until he aged out of being profitable, then discarded him." Daniel's mother collapsed into a chair, sobbing. Rayo Yi felt no satisfaction in the devastation, just tired acceptance that some truths couldn't be softened. Marcus's grandfather cleared his throat. He was older, weathered, carrying himself with military bearing. "The boy, Marcus, he was taken from the streets." "According to the files, yes. Seattle, 6 months ago." "He has family, has me. I've been searching, filed reports, hired investigators." The old man's voice cracked. "His mother, my daughter, she wasn't well, drug problems. Marcus ended up on the streets and I didn't find him fast enough." "You found him now," Rayo Yi said. "That's what matters." The old man looked at Rayo Yi's tattoos, at his cuffed hands, at the federal agents hovering near the door. "They say you're a criminal, that you run an organization in Seoul. They're not wrong. But you saved my grandson." "I did." "Why?" The question came from Rosaline's father. "Why would someone like you risk everything for children you don't know? Is there something you want in return?" Does Rayo Yi want a reward? The question was inevitable. People didn't understand altruism from criminals, didn't trust it, assumed every action had an angle, a price, a hidden agenda. "No reward," Rayo Yi said. "No favors, no debt, your children are safe, that's enough." "It can't be that simple," Rosaline's mother pressed. "People don't there has to be a reason." Rayo Yi considered lying. Considered giving them a reason that made sense in their world of normal motivations and comprehensible choices. But these parents had earned truth. "I had a sister," he said quietly. 15 years ago, people like Sarah Chen took her. I was too young to stop it. Too inexperienced to understand what was happening until it was too late. I never found her. Never got her back. So when your daughter signaled me with the same code my sister taught me, I recognized a second chance. Maybe the only second chance I'll ever get." The room went silent. Even the federal agents stopped their restless hovering. Because grief was a language everyone understood, regardless of which side of the law they operated on. "I'm sorry," Rosaline's mother whispered, "about your sister." Rayo Yi nodded once, acknowledging without inviting further sympathy. Then he looked at Director Chen. "The families have seen me. They know their children are safe. Can we move this along?" But Director Chen was reading something on her phone, her expression shifting from bureaucratic neutrality to something closer to shock. "Mr. Yi, we traced the message, the one about your sister." Rayo Yi's entire body went rigid. "And it came from a facility in Romania, a deprogramming center for trafficking survivors. They have a woman there, Korean, late 20s. She was recovered from a trafficking ring in Eastern Europe 3 months ago. She's been in recovery, learning to speak again, processing trauma. But when your evidence dump hit the news, when your name appeared in connection with the airport rescues, she saw it, recognized it." "How do you know it's her?" Rayo Yi's voice was barely audible. "She told the facility staff her brother's name. Rayo Yi said he'd be looking for her, that she needed him to know she survived." Director Chen turned her phone around, showing a photo. A woman with dark hair and eyes that had seen too much, older than she should be, harder than she should be, but alive. Jaeyeon, after 15 years, after countless nights of wondering and failing and building empires from guilt, after giving up hope so many times he'd lost count, she was alive. Rayo Yi's hands shook against the handcuffs, his carefully maintained composure cracking for the first time since his arrest. "I need to go to Romania. I need to." "You're facing federal charges," Director Chen reminded him gently. "You can't just leave the country." "Then arrange a video call, a phone call, something, please." The last word came out broken, desperate. Nothing like the cold criminal kingpin who'd sat through 18 hours of interrogation without flinching. Director Chen looked at the families crowded into the room, at Rosaline's parents clutching each other, at Marcus's grandfather standing tall and proud despite his tears, at Daniel's mother still sobbing in shame and relief. Then she looked back at Rayo Yi. "I'll see what I can do, but there's something else you need to know." "What?" "Sarah Chen, she's offering full cooperation. Names, locations, financial structures, everything. In exchange for witness protection and reduced charges. My supervisors are considering it." "What happens to the woman?" The question burned through Rayo Yi's chest. Sarah Chen, who'd harvested children from airport terminals, who'd drugged them and fabricated identities and moved them like packages, who'd been part of an organization that stole 237 lives, and she might walk free, protected by the very system she'd exploited. "No," Rayo Yi said flatly. "I'm sorry. No deal, no protection. She doesn't get to trade information for immunity. She doesn't get to disappear into witness protection while the families she destroyed live with the consequences forever. That's not your decision to make. Then make it yours. You want my cooperation. You want me to provide testimony about the evidence I collected. You want access to my underworld contacts who might help trace Victoria Chen's international operations." Rayo Yi leaned forward as far as the handcuffs allowed. "No deal for Sarah Chen. She faces full charges, federal trafficking, international kidnapping, every count, or I disappear into my legal rights and you get nothing." Director Chen's jaw tightened. "You're using cooperation as leverage to prevent a plea deal." "I'm using the only power I have left to make sure that justice, real justice, happens for once. Your system failed. For 18 months it failed. Children vanished from airports and your agencies missed it. Security was compromised and your oversight didn't catch it. An entire international network operated in plain sight and your task forces couldn't stop it. So forgive me if I don't trust that system to suddenly produce appropriate consequences." The room had gone silent again. Families watching a criminal dictate terms to federal agents. Agents struggling with the reality that their best source of information was a tattooed kingpin who just threatened to stop cooperating unless they prosecuted one of their most valuable witnesses. Rosaline's father spoke up suddenly. "He's right. If that woman gets a deal, if she walks free while our children live with trauma, then what's the point? What message does that send?" Marcus's grandfather nodded. The boy saved 3 children at massive personal cost. The least we can do is support his demand for real justice. Daniel's mother looked up from her hands. Please, don't let her get away with this, please. Director Chen looked at her phone at the families at Rayo Yi. Political calculations playing across her face, media scrutiny, public pressure, the optics of a criminal demanding justice and families supporting him. Finally, she sighed. I'll take it to my supervisors. No promises, but I'll advocate against the deal. Not good enough. It's the best I can offer. And Rayo Yi, she stood, preparing to leave. Your sister, Jayon. The facility in Romania says she's been asking for you every day since she saw your name in the news. They say she's ready to talk, to tell her story, to help prosecute the network that held her, but she'll only do it if you're there. The words hit Rayo Yi like a physical blow. His sister, alive and asking for him, offering to testify, offering to help destroy the organization that had stolen 15 years of her life. But he was in federal custody facing charges that could lock him away for decades. How do I get to Romania from a holding cell? Rayo Yi asked quietly. Director Chen paused at the door. Cooperate fully, provide everything you have. Help us dismantle this network completely. And maybe, just maybe, we can arrange for you to make that trip, under supervision, with conditions, but it's possible. She left, taking the other agents with her. The families lingered, uncertain. Finally, Rosaline's mother stepped forward and placed her hand on the table near Rayo Yi's cuffed hands. Thank you, she said simply, for giving us our daughter back, and I hope you get your sister back too. They filed out, leaving Rayo Yi alone in the interrogation room, alone with the echo of their gratitude and the weight of what came next. Somewhere in Romania, Jayon was waiting. Somewhere in this building, Sarah Chen was negotiating for her freedom. Somewhere in a safe house, 3 children were learning to trust again. And somewhere in the machinery of federal justice, decisions were being made about whether a criminal who'd saved children deserved mercy or punishment. Rayo Yi closed his eyes and thought about promises kept, about signals recognized, about second chances that came 15 years too late, but still, impossibly, came. His phone, confiscated and in evidence, would eventually be returned. And when it was, he'd see the messages still flooding in, from journalists exposing the network, from investigators following financial trails, from parents of missing children who finally had hope. But for now, in this moment, he sat in silence and waited for whatever came next. The door opened one final time. A different agent, younger, carrying a laptop. Mr. Yi, we've established a secure video connection to the facility in Romania. Your sister, she's waiting. Rayo Yi's heart stopped, then started again, faster, harder. Now. Director Chen authorized it. 5 minutes, supervised, but she thought you'd earned this. The agent set up the laptop on the table, angling it so Rayo Yi could see despite the handcuffs. The screen flickered, loaded, and then a face he'd seen only in 15-year-old photographs. Older now, changed by time and trauma, but unmistakably, impossibly, his sister. Opa, Jayon's voice cracked on the word. Brother. Rayo Yi's carefully maintained composure shattered completely. I'm here. I'm so sorry I didn't find you sooner. You found me now, Jayon interrupted, echoing his own words to Marcus's grandfather. That's what matters. And in a federal holding cell, surrounded by the consequences of choices both right and wrong, a criminal kingpin who'd risked everything for 3 children he'd never met finally heard his sister's voice again. The video call ended after 7 minutes. 7 minutes that felt like 7 seconds and 7 lifetimes simultaneously. Jayon's face disappeared from the screen, replaced by a cursor blinking against black. The agent who'd set up the laptop closed it quietly, understanding without being told that some moments required silence. Rayo Yi sat motionless, his cuffed hands resting on the metal table, his eyes fixed on the empty space where his sister's face had been. 15 years of guilt. 15 years of building empires from the ashes of failure. 15 years of wondering if she'd suffered, if she'd survived, if she'd forgiven him for being 12 and powerless. She had survived, against odds that should have been impossible, and her first words after recognizing his name in the news hadn't been accusation or anger. They'd been relief. "I knew you'd find me eventually, Opa. I just had to stay alive long enough." The agent cleared his throat. "Director Chen wants to see you again. There's been developments." Developments. In the 18 hours since Rayo Yi's arrest, the evidence dump he'd orchestrated had detonated across multiple agencies simultaneously. The FBI had mobilized task forces. Interpol had issued red notices. Airport security protocols were being overhauled. And somewhere in the machinery of federal justice, decisions were being made about what to do with a criminal kingpin who'd exposed a network that law enforcement had missed for 18 months. Rayo Yi stood, the chains connecting his handcuffs to the table rattling. "Let's get this over with." The hallway outside the interrogation room buzzed with activity. Agents moved with purpose, carrying files and laptops, speaking in urgent tones. Rayo Yi caught fragments of conversation as he was led through the corridor. "Manila facility raided. 17 arrests in the past 6 hours. Media's calling it the biggest trafficking bust in a decade." Director Chen waited in a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Los Angeles. Dawn was breaking, painting the skyline in shades of amber and gold. She gestured for Rayo Yi to sit, then dismissed the escorting agents with a wave. "We found Victoria Chen," she said without preamble. Rayo Yi's spine straightened. "Where?" "Dead, 3 months ago in Bangkok. Overdose, according to local police. But our people think it was staged. Someone wanted her silenced before she could become a liability." So the architect of the network had been eliminated by her own organization. Typical. Rayo Yi had seen it before, criminal enterprises that consumed their creators when those creators knew too much. "Her laptop?" he asked. "Recovered from a storage unit she'd rented under an alias. Our tech team cracked the encryption this morning. It's..." Director Chen paused, searching for words. "It's worse than we thought. The network isn't just trafficking, it's a full ecosystem. Adoption fraud, identity fabrication, passport forgery, money laundering through legitimate charities. She built something that could operate indefinitely without her." "How many facilities?" 14 confirmed. 7 in the US, the rest scattered across Philippines, Thailand, Romania, and Mexico. We're coordinating raids simultaneously to prevent them from scattering. Director Chen pulled up a map on her laptop, red dots marking locations across 3 continents. "This is what you exposed. This is what would still be operating if you hadn't intervened." Rayo Yi studied the map. 14 facilities. How many children in each? How many families destroyed? The math was staggering. "Sarah Chen's cooperation helped," Director Chen continued. "But we both know she's angling for a deal, witness protection in exchange for testimony. My supervisors are seriously considering it." "I told you my position on that." "I know, and I've advocated against it, but..." She closed the laptop. "The reality is that her testimony could put away 37 people. Transporters, security personnel, facility operators. Without her cooperation, half of them walk. Then find another way." "There isn't another way, not legally." Director Chen leaned forward. "You understand leverage, Rayo Yi. You've built a career on it. Sometimes you have to make deals with bad people to catch worse people. That's how the system works." "The system failed." Rayo Yi's voice was flat. "For 18 months, your system allowed children to be harvested from airports while their families searched desperately. Sarah Chen was part of that system. She doesn't deserve protection. She deserves the same cage she put those kids in." "And you, what do you deserve?" The question hung in the air between them. "You're a criminal. You've broken more laws than I can count. You've built an empire on violence and extortion. By every legal standard, you should spend the rest of your life in prison. But you also just saved 3 children and exposed a network that law enforcement had been hunting for over a year. So tell me, what does someone like you deserve?" Is Rayo Yi a changed man? The question cut deeper than any interrogation. Changed implied transformation. growth, some fundamental shift in character. But Rayo Yi didn't feel changed. He felt the same as he'd always felt, driven by a code that prioritized protection over legality, action over procedure, results over methods. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I know what those children deserve. They deserve to see the people who hurt them face consequences, real consequences, not plea deals and witness protection." Director Chen was quiet for a long moment. Then she pulled out her phone and made a call. "It's Chen. Tell the prosecutor we're rejecting Sarah Chen's deal. Yes, I'm aware of the complications, because we have sufficient evidence without her cooperation, and the political cost of protecting a trafficker outweighs the benefit of her testimony. That's my recommendation. Final." She ended the call and looked at Rayo Yi. "There, no deal. She faces full charges, happy." "What changed your mind?" "You did. Or maybe those families in the interrogation room did. Or maybe I'm just tired of watching bad people get good deals while victims get nothing but trauma." Director Chen stood and moved to the window. "The federal prosecutor is still deciding what to do with you. You've committed multiple felonies, but you've also provided evidence that's already led to dozens of arrests. There's talk of immunity in exchange for continued cooperation. Testimony. Access to your underworld contacts who might help trace the international connections. And if I refuse, then you go to prison, probably for a very long time." She turned back to face him. "But I don't think you'll refuse, because your sister is in Romania asking for you, and the only way you get to see her in person is if you cooperate fully with our investigation." Leverage, always leverage. Rayo Yi understood the game. Director Chen was offering a trade, his freedom and his sister in exchange for everything he knew about criminal networks that might connect to Victoria Chen's operation. It was a reasonable deal by any standard, probably more generous than he deserved. "I'll cooperate," Rayo Yi said, "on 2 conditions. First, I want the children, Roseline, Marcus, and Daniel, placed with family or trusted guardians immediately. No foster system, no bureaucratic delays. They've been in enough cages." "Agreed. The families have already been vetted. Reunification is happening this afternoon." "Second condition. When this is over, when I've testified and provided everything you need, I want 24 hours, unsupervised, to handle some personal business." Director Chen's eyes narrowed. "What kind of personal business?" "The kind that doesn't concern federal investigations." Rayo Yi met her gaze steadily. "There are people in my world who need to understand that trafficking children carries consequences beyond legal prosecution. I need to send that message personally." "You're asking permission to commit crimes." "I'm asking for 24 hours where nobody asks questions about what I do or where I go. After that, I'll come back. I'll cooperate. I'll help dismantle whatever's left of Victoria Chen's network. But I need those 24 hours. Director Chen studied him for a long moment, calculating, weighing the value of his cooperation against the risk of letting a criminal kingpin loose with a vendetta. Finally, she sighed. If, and this is a massive if, the prosecutor agrees to immunity, and if you fulfill every single obligation of that agreement, then maybe we can arrange for you to have some unsupervised time. But Rayo Yi, whatever you do during those hours, we never discussed it. Understand? Understood. A knock on the conference room door interrupted them. The young agent from before stepped in, looking apologetic. "Ma'am, the families are here again. They're asking to see Mr. Yi before the children are released to them." "Tell them 5 minutes." Director Chen turned to Rayo Yi. "You've become something of a hero to those people. They don't care about your tattoos or your criminal record. They just know you saved their children when nobody else would." "I'm not a hero." "No, but you're not just a criminal either. That's what makes you complicated." The families crowded into the conference room with the same desperate energy they'd brought to the interrogation room. Roseline's parents, Marcus's grandfather, Daniel's mother, all of them looking at Rayo Yi with expressions that mixed gratitude and uncertainty. Behind them, being led by Maria from the safe house, came the children themselves. Roseline saw Rayo Yi first. Her face lit up with recognition and relief. She pulled away from Maria and ran across the conference room, not slowing until she reached Rayo Yi's chair. Then she stopped, suddenly shy, her small hand reaching out but not quite touching him. "You're still here," she said quietly. "I promised I would be." Rayo Yi knelt to her level despite the handcuffs, bringing himself down to her height. "And I wanted to see you before you go home." "Home," Roseline tested the word like it was foreign. "With them." She glanced back at her parents, uncertainty written across her small face. "With your real family, the people who have been looking for you, the people who love you." Rayo Yi's voice gentled in a way that surprised even him. "You're safe now, really safe, not just for today or tomorrow, but for keeps." Marcus approached next, his 9-year-old soldier's posture still rigid with the hypervigilance of someone who'd learned to trust slowly. His grandfather stood behind him, patient and steady. The old man's hand rested on Marcus's shoulder, and the boy didn't flinch away. "You kept your promise," Marcus said to Rayo Yi. "You saved us. You saved yourselves. You stayed strong. You stayed together. I just opened the door." Daniel hung back near Maria, his eyes still red from crying but clearer than they'd been at the airport. His mother stood apart from the other families, shame and hope warring on her face. The woman who'd traded her son for gambling debts, now getting a second chance she probably didn't deserve but desperately needed. "Can I ask you something?" Roseline's voice pulled Rayo Yi's attention back. "That signal, the one I used, where did you learn it?" "From someone very important to me. Someone who needed help a long time ago, and I wasn't able to give it. But she's alive now. And because of you, because you had the courage to signal when most kids would have stayed silent, I found her again." Roseline's small fingers moved unconsciously, starting to tap that familiar rhythm. Tap, 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 tap. Then she stopped. Her hand opened, palm up, and she pressed it flat against her chest once. A different signal. One Rayo Yi had never taught his sister but understood immediately. "Peace." "Thank you," Roseline whispered. Then she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Rayo Yi's neck in a brief, fierce hug. "For seeing me." The embrace lasted only seconds before her parents gently pulled her back, apologizing for the intrusion. But in those seconds, Rayo Yi felt something shift. Not redemption. He wasn't naive enough to think saving 3 children erased 15 years of criminal activity. But maybe closure. Maybe the beginning of something that could eventually look like peace. What did he whisper to Roseline? The question formed in the air as families began gathering their children, preparing to leave. Rayo Yi caught Roseline's eye one final time and leaned close, his voice barely audible. "When you're older, if you remember this, I need you to do something for me. Find the other children who know that signal, the ones still trapped, the ones still waiting for someone to see them, and help them. Promise me." Roseline's eyes widened. She nodded once, solemn and certain. A promise made between survivors. Between a 7-year-old girl who'd learned to signal for help and a 30-year-old man who'd finally learned to answer. Then the families were moving toward the exit, Maria coordinating the logistics, Director Chen ensuring proper documentation. The conference room emptied slowly, leaving Rayo Yi alone with the morning light streaming through the windows. His phone, returned by the evidence team with a stern warning about proper use, buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out with cuffed hands and saw multiple messages. Updates from Diho about the network's collapse, news alerts about the raids, and one message from an encrypted number that made his blood run cold. Victoria Chen had a partner, someone above her in the hierarchy. "They're coming for you now. Watch your back." No signature, no context, just a warning from someone who knew enough to be dangerous. Who is the next target? The question settled in Rayo Yi's chest with familiar weight, because networks like this didn't die cleanly. Victoria Chen might be dead, Sarah and Marcus might be arrested, facilities might be raided, but the demand that had created the supply still existed. Somewhere someone was already rebuilding, already recruiting, already harvesting. Rayo Yi deleted the message and pocketed his phone. He had testimony to give, immunity to negotiate, 24 hours of unsupervised time to plan for, and a sister in Romania who'd waited 15 years to see her brother again. But after that, after the legal obligations were fulfilled and the federal spotlight moved on, then Rayo Yi would do what he'd always done. Hunt, because Victoria Chen's mysterious partner, whoever they were, had just made a critical mistake. They'd threatened him, and threats, in Rayo Yi's world, were promises that demanded answering. Director Chen returned to the conference room, her expression grim. The prosecutor agreed to immunity, full cooperation in exchange for no charges. You'll need to stay in protective custody until the testimony is complete, but after that, she paused. After that, you're free. Free, the word felt wrong. Rayo Yi had spent 15 years building cages around himself, cages made of guilt and power and the violence required to maintain both. Freedom wasn't something he'd earned. It was just another form of debt that would eventually need paying. When do I testify? Tomorrow, federal grand jury, then international depositions for the coordinated raids. Figure 2 weeks of full-time cooperation. Director Chen handed him a folder. Your travel to Romania is approved. Supervised visit to the recovery facility. You'll have 3 days with your sister, under guard, before returning for additional testimony. 3 days, after 15 years. It wasn't enough, would never be enough. But it was more than Rayo Yi had allowed himself to hope for. Thank you, he said quietly. Don't thank me. Thank those 3 kids who decided you were worth trusting. Director Chen moved toward the door, then paused. The message you received, the encrypted one warning about Victoria Chen's partner, we intercepted it, traced it as far as we could before the signal went dark. Whoever sent it has access to law enforcement channels and underworld networks simultaneously. That's a very short list of people. Meaning you're not the only person playing both sides of this war, and whoever your mysterious informant is, they want you alive for a reason. She opened the door. Watch your back, Rayo Yi, because I have a feeling this story isn't over. The door closed. Rayo Yi stood alone in the conference room, watching the sun rise over Lo's angels. Somewhere in this city, 3 children were going home. Somewhere in Romania, his sister was waiting. And somewhere in the shadows that connected underworld networks across 3 continents, a partner without a name was already planning their next move. Rayo Yi pulled out his phone and typed a message to Di-ho. 3 words that would set machinery in motion. Machinery that operated outside legal channels, outside federal oversight, outside any system except the brutal mathematics of power and consequences. Find them first. The response came back immediately. Already hunting. Because this was what Rayo Yi understood better than courtrooms or immunity deals or supervised visits. This was the language he'd spoken for 15 years. And if Victoria Chen's mysterious partner wanted war, they'd learn the same lesson that every other organization had learned when they threatened what Rayo Yi protected. Some monsters were useful. Some monsters saved children and exposed trafficking networks and kept promises to 7-year-old girls in pink jackets. But they were still monsters. And monsters, when properly motivated, could hunt things that regular heroes couldn't even see. The conference room door opened one final time. Not Director Chen, not the families, just a young agent carrying a change of clothes and discharge papers. Mr. Yi, you're being transferred to protective custody. The prosecutor wants you comfortable before tomorrow's testimony, if you'll come with me. Rayo Yi followed, his mind already 3 moves ahead. Testimony tomorrow, Romania next week. And after that, after the legal obligations were satisfied and the federal spotlight dimmed, then the real work would begin. Because Roseline had given him a final signal. Peace. And Rayo Yi intended to deliver it. Not just for her, but for every child who'd learned to tap desperate rhythms in the darkness. Every brother who'd failed and spent 15 years trying to atone. Every family who turned around for 30 seconds and found their world irrevocably shattered. Peace, hard-won and paid for in blood and sacrifice, and empires burned to the ground. The kind of peace that only came after war. And Rayo Yi, the criminal kingpin who'd risked everything for 3 children he'd never met, was very, very good at war.